The story opens with a young boy declaring that he is a wizard. He plays with a girl who acts as a monster that eats wizards. Raising a wooden branch, he strikes her head. She yells in pain, asking why he hit her for real. He explains monsters are supposed to lose to wizards. Nearby, an elderly man watches them quietly. He remarks on how lively the children are this morning. The boy recognizes him as Rabus. Curious, he asks what it takes to become a wizard. Rabus explains it is not something you can become by wishing. He describes wizards as the peak of humanity, beings who stand at the highest social ranks, nobles and knights who inherited magic from their ancestors. He tells the children they cannot become wizards. A nearby villager interrupts the conversation, questioning the elder about a rumor. Rabus asks what he means. The man mentions a monster sighting. Rabus confirms the rumor is true. He explains a creature was seen at the entrance last night, a leopard covered in pitch-black shadows, the size of an entire house. He reassures the villagers not to panic. The chief has gone to the city to request a wizard, someone powerful enough to subjugate the beast. The girl's mother feels relieved hearing this. She warns her child not to enter the forest. Rabus cautions everyone to stay alert. Without a wizard, killing a monster is nearly impossible. A villager asks if everyone has been informed, then questions if a certain person knows. Rabus asks who he means. The man mentions the shepherd on Hizaril Hill. High above the village, Turan rests alone, looking at the sky in boredom, thinking about how dull life has become. He reflects on seeing the same view every day, wondering if he will forget how to speak. Rabus suddenly appears and calls him pathetic, complaining that he is already slacking off. Turan tells him to move since he blocks the sun. Rabus scolds him for lacking manners, asking if he still holds a grudge. Turan brings up his mother's death, accusing Rabus of trying to take the sheep. Rabus avoids the topic awkwardly. Turan confirms he still holds resentment, declaring he will not share his inheritance. He tells the old man to leave. Rabus shouts in frustration. Turan asks what he actually wants. Rabus explains the monster situation, describing the giant shadow leopard. Turan admits it is serious. Rabus notices Turan is not afraid. Despite being the most likely target, he warns him to be careful, mentioning the wizard will arrive soon. He claims he came out of concern, but Turan doubts his honesty, saying he cares more about the sheep. Turan insults him and tells him to leave. Rabus storms off angrily. Turan reflects on monsters and magic. Humans have wizards while beasts have monsters. He feels curious about seeing a wizard, wondering how strong they truly are. Suddenly he smells something strange, a strong scent of blood. Following it into the forest, he tracks the source carefully until he suddenly stops. Looking down, he sees Rabus torn apart, his body ripped into pieces. Turan realizes the smell came from him. He notes this is no ordinary animal attack. It must be the monster. He senses something approaching. A massive paw lands nearby. The shadow beast reveals itself. The reports were true. Back in the village, the boy asks about monsters. His father explains they are incredibly powerful. Ordinary people would be destroyed instantly. The boy asks what will happen to them. His father reassures him about the wizard, saying they will defeat it easily. Back in the forest, the beast lunges at Turan. He calmly tells it to die. The monster hesitates and retreats. The creature snarls as Turan releases an aura. He questions why his power is not working fully. The beast attacks again. He commands it to stop. It hesitates once more but still continues attacking. Turan dodges smoothly. He realizes killing it directly will not work, so he changes his approach. Reaching into his coat, he pulls out a rock, saying a shepherd should act like one. The beast prepares another strike. Turan places the rock into a sling. His eyes glow gold. He commands the stone to harden, then to become faster. Swinging the sling forward, he tells it to pierce through. The stone launches at incredible speed, breaking through the air like a bullet. The monster barely dodges. Its ear is sliced cleanly. The stone flies past into the distance. The beast charges for a final attack, aiming for his head. Suddenly the stone stops mid-air. It turns and flies back, striking the back of the monster's skull, blowing it apart instantly. The beast collapses lifeless. Turan stands over the corpse calmly, noting it is his first time using this move on a monster. He wonders what to do with the body, complaining about the trouble caused. Then the truth is revealed. Turan is a wizard. He discovered his power 8 years ago, when he was just a child. He made objects float and called his mother excitedly, showing her fire and wind, but she screamed for him to stop. The first and last time she was angry, she called him over to talk, asking if he wanted to live long. He answered yes. She made him promise never to use magic openly, warning him never to reveal it. She explained the difference between nobles and knights. Nobles descended from divine beings, knights from mixed bloodlines, both still considered wizards. She warned him about cruel nobles who treat others like slaves, telling him to keep his power hidden. 8 years pass since that promise. Turan continues to hide his identity. He has no desire to reveal himself or leave the mountain. Suddenly loud knocking interrupts him. Villagers shout for him to come out. He steps outside calmly. They accuse him of killing Rabus, grabbing him aggressively. They call him shameless and accuse him, claiming he let Rabus die. Turan realizes they are shifting blame, using him as a scapegoat. One villager attacks. Turan dodges easily. Using subtle magic, he headbutts the attacker, knocking him down instantly. Another charges and he whispers for him to fall. The man collapses immediately. Turan controls his power carefully, avoiding lethal force. One by one they fall. Soon all the men lie defeated. He tells them they should have used that strength for the funeral. He dismisses the women watching. Returning to his home, inside he reflects on the coming chaos. knowing they will try to exploit him later. He decides he will simply beat them again if needed. Suddenly loud knocking returns. He calls them insane, opening the door in annoyance, but this time someone different stands there. A tall man with a calm presence. Apologizing politely, the traveler asks for a favor. Turan realizes he is not from the village. Remembering his mother's teachings, he feels awkward, trying to act polite. The man's stomach growls loudly. Turan sighs and lets him inside, preparing a simple meal, apologizing for the lack of food. The man calls it a feast. They begin talking quietly. Turan explains he has lived here all his life, rarely seeing outsiders. The man finds this interesting. Noting his good manners, Turan mentions his mother taught him, but she passed away years ago. The traveler praises her upbringing, saying she must be watching from above. Turan asks why he came here. The man explains he was asked to handle a monster, a dangerous puma in the area. Then he reveals the truth. He is a wizard. Turan realizes he is the one the village expected. The man confirms it calmly, then asks a question. He senses a monster nearby, but cannot find it anywhere. His gaze sharpens slightly, waiting for an answer, as tension quietly builds between them. Kieran finds it strange that Turan already knows about the Elder and the monster yet remains completely calm. Noting that if the monster were to target a human, it would most likely be him. He studies Turan carefully and asks if he is scared, remarking that for a mere shepherd he seems unusually brave, his curiosity deepening as he questions who Turan really is beneath that calm exterior. Turan recalls the words of his mother, remembering the moment he once asked why nobody could ever know he was a wizard. She explained that it was because of the nobles, comparing nobles to shepherds and knights to the dogs they raise, warning that even if they show kindness they could discard or sacrifice him at any time, telling him she never wanted that kind of life for him, and asking if he wished to continue living with her, to which he answered without hesitation that he did. She made him promise that no one could ever learn the truth, warning that if other wizards discovered him they would separate them and turn him into nothing more than a tool, a shepherd dog to be used and discarded whenever convenient. She even told him that to survive, he might one day have to kill people. And as Turan reflects on those words, he realizes this situation may finally be that moment. Meanwhile, Kieran waits for an answer and notices Turan's hesitation, joking that the serious expression only makes things awkward, letting out a light laugh to ease the tension. Turan quickly realizes it was only a joke and apologizes for lacking a sense of humor, while Kieran waves it off and insists he should be the one apologizing as he may have flustered him. Kieran admits that it was his first time making a joke about wizards, which is why he went a bit too far, noting that Turan's reaction was amusing enough to tempt him into teasing more than he should have. Deciding to change the mood, he suggests they properly introduce themselves. Expressing that it is nice to meet him, the old man introduces himself as Kieran, describing himself simply as a wanderer. Turan feels slightly embarrassed for not introducing himself first and states that he is just a shepherd, adding that he is 18 years old this year, to which Kieran casually responds that he himself is 75. Prompting Turan to remark that he looks far younger than his age. Kieran explains that wizards age much more slowly than ordinary people and are blessed with far longer lives, a fact that naturally surprises Turan as he listens with interest, curious about the life of someone who has lived so long. Turan asks how Kieran ended up living as a wanderer, and the old man explains that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years he eventually chose to leave, saying that in his later years he desired to roam freely from place to place without being tied down, a lifestyle that Turan finds unexpectedly romantic. As their conversation continues, the atmosphere grows relaxed. Turan quietly reflects on how enjoyable it feels to speak with someone like Kieran. They continue talking as time passes unnoticed, their conversation stretching on until the first light of dawn begins to rise over the horizon. Kieran suddenly realizing how much time has passed without him noticing. As the morning light spreads, Kieran takes out a silver coin and hands it to Turan, explaining that it is Arabian silver and one of the purest forms, worth far more than the meal he was given. Turan accepts it gratefully and wishes him success on his hunt. Kieran laughs and tells him not to act like they will never meet again, suggesting that he might return a few more times to enjoy his cooking before eventually leaving, his tone light as he prepares to depart. Later that day, Turan heads out to the fields as it becomes time for the sheep to graze, commanding them to gather as they immediately respond and begin moving toward him, obeying his words without hesitation. As he watches them, Turan reflects on meeting another wizard for the first time, wondering how long it has been since he had a conversation that felt so natural and comfortable, realizing how different Kieran was compared to anyone he had ever met. He recalls the ease and humor in Kieran's speech, something far beyond any adult he has encountered before, concluding that Kieran is truly a good person, even remembering how the man once brought him a wolf without expecting anything in return. Turan had always believed knights were nothing more than emotionless hunting dogs serving arrogant nobles, but Kieran's presence challenges that belief, leaving him unsure how to even tell the man that there are no more monsters left on Hisarial Hill. Meanwhile, Kieran walks through the forest, sensing something unusual in the air as he notices traces of a recent battle, yet strangely he cannot feel any presence of a monster nearby. Looking up, he spots a rock embedded deep within a tree, recognizing it as something launched with incredible force, wondering if the monster had already been hunted and who could have possibly done it. He considers whether the village chief may have hired another wizard, but instead of concern he feels relief knowing that someone has already made the area safe. Suddenly his senses sharpen as he detects something approaching, turning around just in time to see the monster walking toward him, its face completely torn apart as it releases a horrifying scream. Kieran immediately recognizes it as a monster wraith, questioning who could have allowed this to happen, as the creature suddenly attacks, forcing him to leap backward to avoid the strike. He understands that if the mana of a dead monster is not properly absorbed or dispersed, it will transform into a wraith, a basic principle that any wizard should know, making this situation even more suspicious. Leaping into the air, he concludes that the one who killed the beast must have been a wizard, questioning whether they intentionally left it like this or were simply ignorant of the consequences. He dismisses the idea that a novice knight could have defeated such a monster, considering whether there was another intention behind it, but ultimately deciding that regardless of the reason he must destroy it. Forming a bow of pure lightning in his hand, he draws it back and releases a magical arrow, but the attack disperses instantly upon contact with the monster, leaving him momentarily stunned. Kieran questions whether the monster mana is far stronger than his own, but before he can react, the creature suddenly sinks into the ground and disappears from sight. He realizes it may be attempting to counter magic with magic and searches for its location, only to sense something wrong as the creature emerges from his own shadow and looms over him. The monster strikes down and hits his arm, sending blood flying from the impact as Kieran recognizes that this is far beyond the level a mere knight could handle in battle. He concludes that only a lower-ranked noble or higher could stand a chance against something like this, as the monster sends him flying backward through the air. As he regains his footing, he reflects on the absurdity of encountering such a powerful wraith in a remote village, thinking that life truly throws unexpected challenges without warning. The creature continues to mutate, its form becoming even more grotesque and horrifying as its power rises further, pushing Kieran closer to his limit. Realizing this may be the end, he refuses to die quietly, vowing that even if he falls, he will take the monster down with him. He gathers all of his mana into his hand, preparing a final attack as he waits for the creature to lunge, planning to strike it directly at the moment of impact. As both Kieran and the monster charge toward each other, a sudden flash cuts through the air, something flying out from the forest at incredible speed. A rock slams into the monster with immense force, knocking it to the ground instantly, leaving Kieran stunned by what he just witnessed. Taran steps forward calmly and asks if Kieran is alright, his presence unexpected as Kieran lets out a small laugh and remarks that the shepherd joke is quite shocking as well. Still surprised, Kieran quickly realizes the truth, understanding that Taran is a wizard, asking why he never revealed it, but Taran remains silent. Kieran changes his question and instead asks why he chose to help him, pointing out that Taran could have simply walked away and let him die without consequence. Taran answers simply, recalling the time Kieran brought him a wolf, remembering how he questioned why the man would go so far for such a small favor. As Kieran listens in confusion, Taran continues, explaining that with his abilities he could easily earn far more while living comfortably elsewhere. Kieran responds by calling the villagers pitiful, prompting Taran to ask what he means. As Kieran explains, they live on the frontier, constantly trembling in fear without proper protection. Taran argues that it is not their fault, but Kieran counters by saying that a wizard inherits the power of a god and should live with pride by protecting the powerless. He admits not all wizards think this way, as everyone chooses their own path in life, leaving the meaning behind his words clear. Taran smiles slightly and agrees, but before the moment can settle, the monster rises again, preparing for another attack. Kieran immediately turns serious and tells Taran to listen carefully, warning that this is not an enemy they can handle, explaining that it is far beyond their level. He states clearly that unless someone is at least a noble, they stand no chance, ordering Taran to go to the village chief and help evacuate everyone. As Kieran prepares himself once more, he declares that he will hold the monster off alone, ready to risk everything in order to protect the others. Kieran admits he had spoken boldly, yet does not know how long he can truly endure, while Taran calmly tells him it will be fine, leaving Kieran confused as he questions what he means, and Taran explains that if the attack he just unleashed managed to land, then everything will be alright, as Kieran struggles to understand, wondering if that strike was not even his full strength, believing that a mere young knight hiding in the mountains could never hunt a wraith feared even by nobles. Yet what he witnesses now is far beyond a simple bond formed in a rural village, nor is it reckless bravado from a runaway knight, but something far greater, a scene that feels like the birth of a wizard who could one day overturn the world itself. And as Taran stands before the monster, he admits he too is curious about his own limits, and declares he will test them here, prompting Kieran to step forward and refuse to let him fight alone, warning that despite his talent, this enemy is far too dangerous to face without joining forces. Yet in an instant, the monster lunges, only to be blasted away by a sudden strike, leaving Kieran realizing he cannot even react fast enough and would only become a hindrance, accepting that in this moment he offers no aid and that his role is instead to nurture the blooming talent before him, while Taran presses on, launching relentless attacks against the beast, only to notice that his blows have no effect, as Kieran shouts that a wraith cannot be slain through physical means alone, forcing Taran to ask how he is meant to kill it, and Kieran instructs him to use fire or lightning, igniting a spark within the boy as flames flicker to life in his eyes. Yet the fire merely bounces off the creature, leading him to realize it is not working, and Kieran is stunned that Taran lacks even the basic understanding that proper causality is required when applying magic to living beings, questioning if he truly has no common sense, until he realizes that Taran must have been the one who killed the original monster and allowed it to become a wraith, concluding that he has never absorbed mana in his life. urging him not to simply ignite a flame but to create it and then launch it toward the target. Yet even as he gives instruction, he cannot help but be astonished by the boy's raw strength, as Turan steadies himself and begins to gather fire into his hand, and Kieran reflects that while conjuring flames is simple for a wizard, controlling them requires discipline and training, yet Turan accomplishes it instantly, forming a blazing fire that surges with power, stepping forward without hesitation before hurling it at the monster. The flames erupt upon impact in a violent explosion, the wraith letting out a piercing scream as it burns, writhing within the inferno, and Kieran urgently tells him to keep his mind focused, warning that he must continue pouring mana into the spell so the fire does not fade, insisting that every trace of the wraith must be completely burned away. And as Turan obeys, channeling more mana into the flames, his eyes begin to shimmer with a rainbow glow, the fire growing fiercer with each passing moment until the monstrous presence is finally consumed. And Kieran stands in disbelief, unable to accept what he has just witnessed, reflecting on how overwhelmingly powerful that wraith had been, knowing that it would normally require at least the strength of a noble to defeat it. Yet Turan had brought it down alone, as the boy calmly asks if the battle is truly over, while Kieran remains stunned that a mere shepherd from the mountains achieved such a feat, quickly warning him that if he does not wish to face another wraith, he must absorb the mana left behind. And when Turan asks how it is done, Kieran tells him to imagine drawing something into himself, guiding him through the process as Turan nods and places his hand upon the remains, focusing deeply as a green aura begins to rise from the corpse, gathering into his palm, and as the energy flows into him, it spreads throughout his entire body, circulating endlessly, causing him to shiver as an unfamiliar sensation takes hold. And Kieran explains that he will feel a certain kind of pleasure from the process, still unable to believe what he is seeing even with his own eyes. He asks if this was truly the boy's first time absorbing mana, and Turan confirms it without hesitation, leading Kieran to explain that after an initial awakening, mana usually grows slowly over time, and the most efficient way to increase it is by killing monsters or other wizards and absorbing their energy. Realizing that for Turan to display such growth on his first attempt means his innate potential exists on an entirely different level, concluding that the boy must belong to a noble lineage. Kieran lowers himself in respect and apologizes for his earlier rudeness, asking which noble house Turan comes from. Yet the boy simply tells him to wipe the blood from his body first, and later inside the house Kieran sits with his arm wrapped in bandages, apologizing once more for his lack of manners, feeling ashamed that someone as extraordinary as Turan had to perform such a task. But Turan reminds him that he is not anyone special, insisting that he is merely a shepherd who does not even know who his father is. His gaze sharpens as he tells Kieran to stop with the formalities, and though the man agrees, he cannot help but question why someone so powerful would choose such a life, explaining that he does not mean disrespect, yet the role simply does not suit him, and Turan reveals that it was his mother's final wish, something she held on to until her dying breath, prompting Kieran to ask for more, as Turan explains that nobles live below the mountains, and if his identity as a wizard were revealed, he would only be used and discarded. And Kieran acknowledges that his mother was wise, surprising Turan, who expected him to call it overprotective, yet Kieran admits she was not entirely wrong, reflecting that great power inevitably invites conflict, recalling a devastating war between noble houses just 20 years prior, a battle between the house he served, Arabian, and the great house of Zahar, where countless lives were lost, and of the 3,000 knights of Arabian more than 900 perished, nearly a third wiped away, and among them were all those he held dear, his friend Denver, his teacher Hartman, and even his beloved wife and son, all massacred by House Zahar, leading him to admit that his mother's fears held truth, as the life of a knight can vanish far more easily and meaninglessly than that of a commoner. Yet he points out that she was wrong about one thing, Turan's aptitude, admitting with quiet embarrassment that he himself is a fairly skilled knight, yet even he could not defeat the wraith that Turan destroyed with ease, declaring that the boy's potential is not merely that of a knight, but at the very least that of a noble, and among them an upper tier at that, causing Turan to question whether his mother had lied about his father being a knight. Yet Kieran explains that on rare occasions a child of lesser ability can be born among nobles, or a noble-level child among knights, suggesting that it would be better for Turan to leave the mountain and step into the wider world. When Turan asks why he should do so, Kieran explains that humanity is still not the true master of the world, that long ago other races cast aside by the gods continue to watch for their chance to rise again, and yet even in such times nobles remain consumed by their own wars, insisting that this is an age that desperately needs someone both strong and kind like Turan, asking him if he is truly content living as a shepherd, and Turan quietly wonders what he could possibly gain from descending the mountain. To which Kieran answers that it depends on his desires, whether it be wealth, fame, authority, family, or companionship, explaining that such things are difficult to obtain where he is now, urging him to imagine a life where he could wander freely, slay monsters, explore the unknown, or even be adopted into a noble house and walk the path of power. And as Kieran listens, he admits that it does sound far more interesting than tending sheep, feeling for the first time a genuine curiosity about the world beyond. While Kieran worries he may be placing unnecessary expectations upon him, he still promises to support whatever path Turan chooses, before asking about his bloodline ability, leaving the boy confused as Kieran apologizes and explains that he often forgets how little Turan knows of magic, describing bloodline abilities as traits inherited from noble ancestors known as the Frians, and that possessing such an ability is what separates nobles from knights, asking if any spell came unnaturally easy to him or if he possesses an exceptional ability that does not rely on magic. And though Turin wonders if it is simply his strength, Chiron clarifies that mana alone enhances physical ability, prompting Turin to mention his keen sense of smell and his skill at throwing stones, leading Chiron to note that heightened senses can indeed be considered a bloodline trait, while proficiency with thrown weapons is associated with House Arabian, though not uniquely, urging him to continue, and after listening carefully, Chiron eventually declares that he believes he knows which house Turin's abilities most closely resemble, causing the boy to ask for its name, and as Chiron's expression darkens, he reveals it belongs to a great house known as the Pursuers, or Hunters, the very house Zahar that once stood as his enemy, and upon hearing this, Turin grows visibly uneasy, his expression filled with concern as he realizes he shares blood with those who brought Chiron so much pain, considering whether he should apologize despite knowing they are strangers to him. Yet Chiron tells him not to carry such a burden, reminding him that he had no part in that war, and that such matters belong to the past, declaring that hatred will never end if blood continues to answer blood, and when Turin asks if he holds regrets, Chiron questions what he means, only for the boy to clarify he is referring to his suggestion of leaving the mountain, and Chiron explains that pursuing power would inevitably lead him toward House Zahar, acknowledging his exceptional talent, yet stating that he trusts the goodness within him, explaining that Turin revealed his hidden identity simply to save him, and that if someone like him were to rise within that house, perhaps he could one day prevent such tragedies from ever happening again. Chiron tells him there is no need to think too seriously about the matter, reflecting that no decision about joining any family has been made yet. Yet Turin calmly declares that his thoughts are now clear and that he wants to try descending the mountain. And while Chiron acknowledges that he has thought it through well, the boy adds that he does not wish to leave immediately, explaining that he will only head down once Chiron's injuries have healed, prompting Chiron to call him kind as he nods and insists that his wounds are merely scratches, though deep down he recognizes that the boy before him is truly a good person. Later inside the house, Chiron begins to explain that mana is absolutely required to use magic, stating that it is often referred to as the key to omnipotence, and when Turin asks about the meaning of the term, Chiron clarifies that it is not truly omnipotent despite the name, explaining instead that magic can only be used when one possesses mana that properly matches it, leading the boy to ask what determines that standard. And without hesitation, Chiron explains that the difficulty of magic is largely determined by three factors: bloodline, affinity, and causality. He continues by explaining that bloodline is defined by the lineage one is born into, something that applies to most nobles rather than knights, and he considers that it would likely be difficult for Turin to heal wounds using magic, asking if he is mistaken, only for Turin to confirm that he is not. Chiron continues explaining that for members of the Ravista bloodline from the south, such feats can be achieved even without training, since the power itself originates from their bloodline. And as Turin listens, he asks about the second factor, affinity, which Chiron describes as familiarity, explaining that it reflects how a mage can more easily perform actions they prefer or have grown accustomed to, and Turin reflects that it is similar to how he created a fireball as naturally as throwing a rock, prompting Chiron to confirm his understanding while noting that simply forming flames would not have produced the same speed or destructive force. And as he shifts to the final factor, he emphasizes that causality is the most important, though he admits he does not fully grasp it himself, asking Turin what would happen if he attempted to kill him directly using mana, leading Turin to casually respond that perhaps a faint light would shine from his head and nothing more would occur, and Chiron affirms that this is precisely what happens when causality is absent, explaining that without a proper cause for an intended result, or when the desired outcome is excessively difficult, the magic simply fails to manifest effectively. And as Turin reflects on this, he begins to piece together an understanding, realizing that instead of merely wishing for Chiron's death with mana, he would need to create a logical cause such as conjuring and launching flames, something far more natural than forcing an unnatural outcome. And Chiron nods in agreement, quietly thinking that Turin might have been suited to the life of a scholar rather than a mage, yet Turin shifts the topic by mentioning that he can control ordinary animals at will, questioning why magical beasts require such different handling. And Chiron explains that it is because of the mana within them, their conversation continuing while a sheep quietly listens nearby. And Chiron reflects that magic is far from simple, while Chiron responds that a true mage must understand not only how to wield mana, but also the principles and conditions behind it, leading Chiron to wonder whether the House Zahar bloodline also possesses unique abilities, and Chiron confirms that they excel in stealth and tracking, suggesting that Chiron attempt it himself, and as Chiron agrees he closes his eyes, focusing on the desire to remain unseen, wishing for a state where neither sound nor scent could betray him, and slowly his presence begins to fade until he vanishes entirely, asking if it worked, leaving Chiron standing in stunned silence as he sees nothing before him, eventually confirming that Chiron succeeded since he can no longer perceive him at all. And as the room falls quiet, Chiron feels a subtle sadness at the emptiness before Chiron gradually reappears, and Chiron reflects that it has been a long time since he last witnessed that ability, acknowledging with a nod that it remains a terrifying power, recalling how during the war the Arabian knights feared that very ability above all else. While Chiron considers how overwhelmingly unfair such power seems, Yet Charon assures him that it is not invincible, and declares his intent to teach him proper magic training methods, prompting Turan to remark that he is being overly kind in guiding someone from an enemy bloodline, though Charon reminds him that he saved his life and treated him with sincerity, reaffirming that he trusts his character. And later, an unpleasant bald man questions whether Turan truly intends to sell the sheep and leave, demanding to know who will take over the shepherding and how he could decide such matters without consulting them. Yet Turan calmly responds that they can find another shepherd themselves, stating that what he does with his belongings is none of their concern, warning that they should purchase the sheep at a fair price or he will simply release them and depart, adding that they are free to try capturing them, though it would not be easy, and as the village chief observes him, he realizes that this is a man who keeps his word and that provoking him would bring no benefit, conceding with reluctant understanding as he hands over a bag of money and tells him to do as he wishes. And as Turan and Charon begin to leave, Turan reflects that the villagers still owe compensation to Charon and briefly considers collecting it. Yet Charon dismisses the idea, stating he has no intention of receiving anything since Turan was the one who defeated the beast, and Turan acknowledges this before realizing they have reached the point where their paths must diverge, and Charon apologizes for declining the offer to travel together, explaining that he is more at ease on his own, while Turan accepts this without resentment, expressing his gratitude for everything he has been taught, and Charon bids him farewell, urging him to take care, while Turan replies that he hopes they will meet again with smiles, watching the knight's retreating figure for a long time until it fades into the distance, and only afterward does he come to understand why he disliked the man speaking formally to him, realizing that while he had never lacked love from his mother, he had always quietly longed for a father figure, someone to guide him and serve as an example of the man he should become. And with that realization, his journey continues, as he ventures deep into the desert and beyond a vast canyon. And as he walks, he lifts his gaze to see farther ahead, eventually spotting a group of people in the distance, wondering if they might be traveling merchants moving between villages, and thinking it fortunate since he can ask them for directions. He approaches and is immediately questioned by a man demanding to know who he is to block their path, and Turan calmly explains that he is traveling alone and asks for the location of the nearest city, and they inform him that if he follows the road they came from, he will arrive at a place called Mura, and after thanking them, Turan begins to leave, only to be stopped as one of the men calls out for him to wait, questioning whether he truly intends to leave after receiving information without offering anything in return, and Turan turns back in confusion asking what the man wants, only for the man to insist that receiving something requires giving something back, and as they draw their blades, they order him to remove his bag, prompting Turan to ask if they are bandits, and the man responds with a challenge asking what he would do if they were, while another declares that this is mere recklessness, noting that in this wasteland no one would find it strange if someone died, pointing his sword at Turan and ordering him to hand over his belongings while they are still being merciful, explaining that killing and stripping him would only make things unnecessarily bloody, and Turan calmly acknowledges their intent, recognizing them as killers, recalling his training with Kiorn as memories of their lessons resurface. The group bursts into laughter at his words, mocking him as they claim he sounds like some kind of wizard. Yet without hesitation, Turan raises his hand and with a single motion releases a powerful gust of wind that sends the men flying through the air, their bodies thrown back violently as shock spreads across their faces, and as he observes the result, he notes that rather than generating wind from nothing, shaping existing air with his hand and amplifying it consumes far less mana, realizing with quiet surprise that he can produce such overwhelming force with only a small amount, leaving the men completely disoriented and unable to comprehend what just happened. And before they can recover, Turan reaches for his water pouch, drawing the liquid into the air as it gathers and hardens into a crystal, forming sharp structures that glisten under the light, and with growing focus he creates more of them, multiplying the crystalline weapons as the bandits begin to realize the grave mistake they have made, and in an instant one of the men is pierced clean through, the crystal impaling him and ending his life immediately. And as Turan watches, he reflects that while this spell is meant to be effective in areas rich with water, simply throwing stones still feels faster and stronger for him at the moment. Panic spreads among the remaining bandits as they begin to apologize frantically, claiming they did not know he was a wizard. Yet even as they beg for mercy, their leader subtly distracts him, while the others attempt to circle behind, creeping closer in a desperate attempt to turn the situation. But Turan calmly lifts his foot and slams it into the ground, and in that moment pillars of sand erupt upward beneath them, piercing through their bodies as the earth itself becomes a weapon, impaling each of them in a brutal instant, and the battlefield falls silent as the leader remains frozen in place, staring in disbelief at the corpses of his fallen men, his voice trembling as he mutters that such a thing is impossible. Yet Turan calmly states that he has a single question, and the man, now terrified, declares he will answer anything, and Turan asks why they attacked him without any real plan, pointing out that a lone traveler could easily be a wizard, and the leader explains that it was because Turan lowered his head, that even when they spoke rudely he bowed and greeted them, leading them to believe he was nothing more than an ordinary person, and upon hearing this Turan thanks him, acknowledging that he has learned something valuable. A faint smile forms on the bandit's face as he asks if he will truly be spared, yet above him water begins to gather, forming into a suspended mass as Turan recalls Chiron's stern warning, his voice echoing in memory as he explains that Turan will meet many kinds of people and must understand one thing above all else, that he must never show mercy to scum like bandits, those who harm others without hesitation for their own gain, and that he speaks so firmly because he understands the boy's nature. And as the memory fades, Turan quietly acknowledges the truth in those words, realizing that sparing one life out of pity could lead to the suffering of many innocent people, and without hesitation he brings the water down, ending the man's life. And as silence returns, he reflects that he has delayed long enough, turning his attention to the tracks left behind by the cart the bandits have been dragging, the clear lines etched across the sand, offering him a path forward. And as he follows them, one thought burns deeply within his mind, that he has killed people, and though guilt weighs on him, he understands that letting them go was never an option. Karen's warning resurfaces in his thoughts, reminding him that such people would only continue to harm others without hesitation. And like tracks in the desert slowly fading as the wind carries sand across them, Turan's turbulent emotions begin to settle as he recalls everything he has been taught, and eventually his journey leads him to something entirely new as he arrives before the small city of Murray, a place vastly different from the village where he spent his life. And as he gazes upon it, he finds it beautiful, the streets filled with people moving endlessly, more than he has ever seen gathered in one place. The buildings themselves unfamiliar in design, making him feel as though he has truly stepped into another world. And as he walks through the bustling streets, he approaches a shopkeeper who greets him, asking what he can offer. Yet Turan states that he is not here to buy anything, recalling Karen's advice that if he needed a place to stay, he should seek out an inn, and the shopkeeper immediately dismisses him, telling him to leave if he is not purchasing fruit, leaving Turan confused as he wonders if such rudeness is normal in cities, or if there exists some unspoken rule that one must buy something before asking questions. Pointing to a fruit, he asks its price, and the merchant replies that it costs 2 ducat, prompting Turan to ask what a ducat even is, and the merchant notes that he must be an outsider unfamiliar with their currency, adding that other coins are acceptable. And after handing over payment, Turan asks for directions to an inn, and the man directs him toward the largest one in the city, and upon arriving he is welcomed by a staff member named Lena, who greets him warmly and even remarks on his appearance, calling him a handsome guest. As Turan asks the cost for a night, she tells him it is 16 ducat, and he agrees to stay while mentioning he has another question, asking if there are any nearby monsters with bounties, which surprises her. And as he reflects on his need to hunt monsters to absorb mana, he recalls Kiran explaining that such hunts also bring income, and when she hesitates, he asks why she is not answering, prompting her to remark that nothing in this world is free, eventually persuading him to buy a drink before directing him to City Hall. And when he asks what that is, she looks at him in disbelief, stating that he must truly be from the countryside, before explaining that city halls handle public matters and are staffed by officials working under the city's lord, adding that it is likely closed for the night, and suggesting he visit in the morning if he seeks monster bounties. And as she studies him, she asks if he is also a monster hunter, prompting Turan to question what that means, and she explains that some believe ordinary people can become wizards by hunting monsters, dismissing it as foolish superstition. Yet Turan wonders if it is truly false, when suddenly a hand rests on his shoulder, and a man named Midden declares that it is not superstition but fact, claiming he has witnessed it himself, surprising Lena, who thought him dead. Yet Midden insists he will not die until he becomes a wizard, and as Turan gently removes his hand, he expresses interest in hearing more, and Midden explains that just as wizards grow stronger by hunting monsters, ordinary people can awaken in the same way, revealing that he and his companions are pursuing that very path. Turan asks if any of them have already become wizards, but Midden denies it, explaining that the city only has the Lord's wizard and 3 others, and observing Turan's worn equipment, he questions whether he even has a proper weapon, prompting Turan to reveal his sling, which Midden notes has clearly seen heavy use, and while Turan explains its effectiveness for firing small projectiles quickly, Midden suggests it would suffice for hunting smaller monsters, mentioning that they have been hoping to find another ranged fighter, and asking if he would join them, but Turan declines with a polite smile, thanking them for the offer. And later that night, as he rests in his room, he reflects on the chaos of the day, still struggling to believe that he has truly left his village behind, wondering what lies ahead, when suddenly he senses a presence outside his door, and recalling Karon's warning that cities are not inherently safe, he approaches cautiously, channeling mana into his hand as a precaution. Before opening the door slightly and finding Lena standing there, she asks if he was asleep, and claims she came because the room might be cold, offering to keep him warm, leaving Turan confused as he questions her meaning, and with a knowing smile she begins to undress, stating that her intentions are exactly as they seem. Yet Turan only grows more bewildered, asking again what she means, and she explains that for a small price she will fulfill whatever he desires, assuming his intentions based on his expression. Yet Turan remains completely unmoved, his expression calm and almost detached as Lena stares at him in disbelief, and in that moment he recalls Kindren's angered warning, the firm reminder that he must never fall for such traps, and the lesson echoes clearly in his mind as he stands there, unwavering and unaffected. The man had warned him that he must always be cautious around women and inns and prostitutes in general, explaining that many of them carry diseases, and while those like him possess strong resistance and would not suffer much, Turan could unknowingly pass such illnesses to another woman in the future, advising him not to let fleeting desire trap him into choices he would regret. And as Turan reflects on this, he begins to realize that cities are not easy places to live either, recalling the fruit seller from earlier and now Lena as well, seeing how even the smallest bits of information or conversation come with a price, leading him to quietly conclude that cities are far colder than they appear. And as he continues thinking, he overhears Midan and his companions speaking nearby, questioning why he had tried to bring along that boy from earlier, one of them remarking that Turan did not seem particularly useful, while another agrees and adds that his arrogance would make him perfect bait, yet Midan calmly explains that it is because Turan reminds him of his younger self, believing that if the boy stayed close he might at least survive a little longer, though the others tell him he is far too kind-hearted, and hearing this Turan cannot help but smile, thinking that perhaps the city is not entirely cold after all. The following day, he heads to the city hall where a man asks if he needs assistance and Turan questions if he is an official, only for the man to respond bluntly, asking what else he could possibly be, and Turan explains that he came to hunt monsters, which leaves the man momentarily confused. And as Turan recalls Kiorn's earlier words that the world would not treat him kindly, he instead considers that there is no reason for it to be kind at all, remembering that if he wishes for people to treat him with respect, the method is simple. Revealing himself as a wizard would be enough for others to bow their heads. The official hands him a document, instructing him to read it and return it rather than taking it, and as Turan looks over it, he asks if the target is a crow monster, prompting the man to respond sarcastically, questioning if it looks like a cat instead, before explaining that once a monster is killed, it must be brought back so that a wizard can disperse its mana and prevent it from turning into a wraith, warning that abandoning such a corpse is punishable by death under city law. And Turan understands this well, recalling the consequences of such mistakes and knowing he cannot repeat them. He then asks why knights do not hunt monsters, and the official replies that they do not have time for such tasks, explaining that their duty is to maintain order within the city, while dealing with monsters outside falls to people like him. And as Turan leaves, the man mutters that another corpse will likely be added beyond the city walls. Yet not long after, Turan returns, carrying a dead monster with a massive hole in its chest, shocking everyone present as they struggle to believe their eyes, questioning how he managed to bring it back so quickly, and whether he truly defeated it alone. Turan confirms that he did and asks if he can receive the reward, and the official quickly agrees, rushing off to retrieve it before handing over a bag of money and telling him to rest, while the others continue to marvel at the condition of the corpse, noting that even its wings remain intact and wondering how such a creature could be brought back like this. And as the official looks over again, he asks why Turan is still standing there, prompting the boy to ask if there are more monsters worth hunting, leaving them questioning if he truly intends to continue. Later at the inn, Lena presents him with some of the most expensive items on the menu, admitting she never imagined someone like him could defeat 30 monsters in just 3 days, remarking that he must have earned a fortune from the bounties, while Turan eats quietly, almost childlike in his focus, explaining that money is not his true goal but rather the mana of the monsters, noting that thanks to it he has grown significantly stronger, far beyond when he first met Kiorn, though he now senses a limit approaching, realizing that hunting only weak monsters will no longer be enough to push him further. He then turns to Lena with a question, asking if she had taken a bite of his meal, only for her to remind him that he finished it entirely on his own, teasing him for his appetite despite his slender frame, while the chef expresses satisfaction at seeing his food enjoyed. And as Turan compliments the meal and prepares to leave, one of Midan's companions suddenly grabs his coat, questioning why he is enjoying such fine food alone, mocking him for his recent earnings and suggesting he share some charity with them. Without hesitation, Turan strikes him across the face, sending him stumbling backward, as he calmly asks if he would like more charity. And when another man lunges at him in anger, Turan effortlessly dodges and counters with another blow, while a third rushes in with a chair only to have it blocked with ease, and with a simple flick of his finger, Turan strikes the man's forehead, ending the fight instantly, as Lena shouts for them to stop causing trouble in the inn. Later, Midan approaches and apologizes sincerely, explaining that he has already scolded them and promising such behavior will not happen again, admitting that they have been struggling financially, and grew jealous upon seeing Turan's success, and after forcing the others to apologize, he explains that they may not even be able to afford their lodging, though he insists it is their own problem. Yet Turan quietly produces a bag of money and offers it to him, leaving Midan confused as he asks why. Turan explains that it is repayment for the kindness Midan showed earlier, recalling how he had tried to look out for him, and when Midan asks how he even knew about that, Turan simply states that nothing comes for free, requesting information in return, and Midan laughs, declaring that information is his specialty, and promising to share everything he knows. And later, as Turan stands outside the city, he reflects that this may be his final hunt here, noting that Midan provided details about his next destination, and that it is time to move on. He thinks about how much useful information he received and considers Midan a genuinely good person, perhaps not as experienced as Kiran, but all the more sincere because of it. Yet as he prepares to leave, he suddenly senses something, recognizing a familiar scent that causes him to run toward it, hoping his instincts are wrong, and as he enters the jungle, he notices markings on a tree before spotting a man collapsed nearby, his chest torn open and bleeding heavily, and Turan recognizes him as one of Midan's companions. His gaze shifts and he sees Midan lying lifeless on the ground. The coins Turan had given him scattered nearby and stained with blood, and for a moment he can only wonder what had happened, kneeling beside them as one man barely clings to life, struggling to speak until he manages to utter a single word, "Rabbit," leaving Turan confused until the man clarifies with his final breath that it is a rabbit monster, and as Turan turns he sees it, a creature feasting on another body. The beast notices him and lifts its head, its red eyes glowing as it locks onto him, and in an instant it charges forward with terrifying speed, forcing Turan to dodge as it crashes into a tree, destroying it completely, and he realizes just how fast it is, knowing he was nearly struck, yet he quickly regains focus, spinning his sling and releasing a shot, the stone splitting into three mid-air as they rush toward the creature, only for it to destroy them effortlessly. Turan observes that the beast is accustomed to defending against thrown weapons, and as it prepares to strike again, it suddenly loses sight of him as Turan vanishes completely, halting its attack in confusion, and in the next moment, Turan reappears behind it, dagger in hand as he drives it into the creature's neck before retreating, and once again fading from sight, using his magic to disappear into the air itself. The monster strikes in that instant, yet Turan has already faded from sight, becoming completely invisible, leaving the beast to slash through nothing but air as its attack crashes into a tree and cuts it down. The rabbit monster quickly descends into madness, furiously hacking apart every tree within reach, its rage growing wilder with each swing, until time drags on and its body begins to fail. Exhaustion creeps in as it finally slows to a halt, releasing a deafening scream into the forest, while blood continues to pour from its wounds. Its strength fades and at last it collapses lifeless onto the ground, defeated not by force but by Turan's calculated provocation. As silence settles, he releases his invisibility and calmly approaches the corpse, extending his hand toward the fallen beast as he begins absorbing its mana, immediately sensing the difference as the flow of energy surpasses that of the leopard he once faced. Nearby, the barely surviving man watches in disbelief, unable to accept what he is witnessing. Turan calmly confirms that he is indeed a wizard. The man questions why he would hide such an identity, yet Turan instead asks if any of them have belongings he can deliver to their families. The man breaks down in tears, admitting he has no one left. Regret fills his gaze as Turan recalls Midan mentioning a great city called Orem. Curiosity sparks within him as he asks what a library is, and Midan explains that it holds thousands of books. Noting how the moment Turan heard the word books, his interest became undeniable. Turan questions if that is true, and Midan adds that not just anyone can enter such a place, prompting Turan to ask how he could gain access. Midan reveals that only wizards are allowed inside. Hearing this, Turan quietly declares that he understands and has already made his decision. When Midan asks what he means, Turan states that he will go to the great city he mentioned, now standing over freshly made graves. Turan bids them farewell, wishing them peace. Turning away, he continues his journey. Sometime later, he finds himself standing in line, feeling slightly embarrassed, remembering how impressed he once was by the small city of Murray. Now before the massive city of Orem, he realizes just how vast it truly is. Judging by its overwhelming scale, he had never imagined so many people would gather just to enter. His gaze shifts to the guards as he wonders if they are searching for criminals. As expected of such a grand city, its systems are far more structured. The guards suddenly stop him and he asks what is wrong, only to be told that he cannot enter in his current filthy state. They advise him to at least clean himself before trying again. Later, he finally makes his way inside and stands before a towering structure. He reflects that this must be the library. Midan spoke of its presence overwhelming, as if constructed through magic itself. Approaching the entrance, he declares his intent to enter, only to be stopped by guards who state that only wizards are permitted. He insists that he is one, yet a guard reacts angrily, questioning if he wishes to die for impersonating a wizard, declaring that someone like him could never be one. As the guard attempts to channel mana, Turan recalls Kioran's words. Wizards can sense each other's power and determine strength. Deciding to use this knowledge, he releases an immense surge of mana. The guard immediately collapses, overwhelmed by the sheer pressure, realizing that Turan is no ordinary wizard, but one of noble class or higher. In panic, he introduces himself as Kenya, a knight of House Valtes, and demands to know Turan's origin. Turan calmly asks if revealing such information is necessary for entry, and the man replies that it is not. However, he explains that to use the library, Turan must receive permission from the master of Valtes. When Turan asks what that entails, the guard assures him he will contact the house on his behalf. Later, Turan sighs, realizing he had expected a simple process, yet now finds himself being attended to by maids within a bathhouse. Confusion crosses his mind as he wonders how things escalated to this point. He tells them to stop asking if he cannot wash himself, but they explain that failing to properly serve an esteemed guest would result in punishment. Accepting this, he allows them to continue as they thank him sincerely. Later, one maid blurts out that he is amazing. She quickly covers her mouth in embarrassment, and Turan asks if something is on his face. She apologizes, explaining she was overwhelmed by how handsome he is. He reassures her there is nothing to forgive, yet the other maids urge him not to speak so casually to them. At that moment, someone enters the room expressing surprise. A girl steps forward, remarking that she cannot believe he is the same guest who arrived looking like a beggar. She observes that after cleaning up, he resembles a prince, while her bodyguard warns her about her words. Turan introduces himself and she responds with her name Azella. She asks which house he belongs to, yet he hesitates, explaining it is difficult to answer. She sighs, saying that is unfortunate. Before deciding to tease him for withholding the truth, she releases her mana, allowing it to spread throughout the room as if challenging him to respond. Turan feels the immense pressure of her mana crashing into him, yet after a brief moment he releases his own. Their auras collide violently, causing the surroundings to tremble as a guard rushes in to shield the maids from the overwhelming force. After a short clash, Turan withdraws his mana and Azella follows. She lets out a surprised reaction, glancing at her trembling hands before laughing and suddenly asking if he wants to marry her. Caught completely off guard, Turan freezes, unable to process her words as she teases him, assuring it was only a joke, yet still urges him to consider it, since the seat beside her remains empty. With that, she leaves alongside her guards while Turan watches her departure before noticing his own hands trembling as well. Realizing that her mana is at least equal to his, he begins to question if such strength is considered normal in this city. The scene shifts as Turan is finally granted an audience with Rug Valtas, the Lord of Aurum, who welcomes him as a young noble and asks if he already knows his name. Turan introduces himself and Rug repeats it before asking if he seeks access to the library, mentioning that many come chasing rumors of ancient magic or secrets to increase mana. He clarifies that no such things exist there. Turan calmly replies that he never sought those things. After studying him briefly, Rug grants permission, noting that nothing within is confidential to his house. As night has fallen, he suggests Turan return the next day and rest for now, asking if that is acceptable. Turan expresses his gratitude, promising not to forget the kindness. The following day, the guards verify his pass and welcome him as an esteemed guest into the Sky Library. As he pushes open the doors and steps inside, he looks upward, seeing an endless spiral of shelves stretching toward the sky. At last, he understands the true nature of this place. A voice then calls out to him and he turns to see a young girl introducing herself as the librarian. She states she will explain the rules by order of the Lord, surprised that someone so young holds such a role. Turan listens as she raises a finger, explaining that he must compensate for any damage, that no books may be taken outside, and that she will be watching him at all times. Feeling uneasy, he asks if she could stand farther away while he reads. Before asking if she has read the books herself, she confirms this and offers to help him find anything he needs, even suggesting genres like romance, history, or something more provocative due to his age. This leaves him momentarily stunned, but gathering himself, Turan states that he wishes to learn the basic common sense of the world, which in turn surprises her. Moving quickly, she gathers a heavy stack of books, placing them before him, explaining that many are too old to be useful, but guiding him toward a more suitable section. He thanks her and she responds warmly as he picks up a book, reflecting on what it truly is. Opening it carefully, he begins to read, his expression slowly changing as he realizes just how incredible these books are. And from that day forward, Turan continues this routine, returning again and again to immerse himself within the endless knowledge of the library. Turan now delves into the world's geography, its countless races, absorbing knowledge about wizardly etiquette, the crafting and processing of various items, studying monsters and relics from the age of the Old Empire. Each book he reads adding depth and clarity to a world that had once been nothing but an empty unknown. Slowly, his understanding grows sharper and more vivid. Lord Rug Valtas later remarks on Turan's excellent use of the library, Tarn confirming the boy's diligence. The Lord states that beyond treating him as a noble, allowing him access was a gesture of goodwill, and adds that he expects some compensation too. Turan does not hesitate, asking what the Lord requires. Rug explains that a monster has appeared north of Aurum, attacking travelers, noting that 4 knights sent to subdue it never returned, apparently devoured. He adds that with only 2 members available from his house, a noble must personally intervene. Turan agrees silently, thinking that protecting the people is exactly what a wizard ought to do, yet an unease lingers in him, sensing that wizards rarely intervene in such matters. Rug emphasizes that the Northern Road is a vital trade route blocked for 10 days, a timeline that predates Turan's arrival, explaining the Lord's willingness to let him use the library. The scene shifts as a large group departs from Aurum, Azella commenting that her father is extraordinary to mobilize a guest for a monster hunt, and questioning whether the 4 knights were truly that unreliable. She clarifies that she is not blaming anyone yet, insists the Lord is making a fuss. The man beside her laughs, suggesting that calling the Lord fussy might be excessive. Azella snaps at him to drop it. He pauses, turning to introduce himself as Marvin Valtas, expressing that he looks forward to working with Turan. Turan returns the greeting politely. As they walk, Azella urges a swift resolution to finish quickly and return to rest. Marvin leans in, teasing if Turan is interested in his big sister. Turan instantly replies no. Marvin visibly relieved. Suddenly, the lead guard shouts for everyone to halt. Ahead, they find a carriage destroyed along the road. Inspecting the wreckage, a guard asks if the creature was responsible, while another deduces that the travelers must have come from the south since the north had been forbidden. Turan studies a mark on a wooden board in silence before declaring that the monster is a monkey. Azella repeats the word skeptically. Turan points out a handprint, explaining that the creature attacked the peddlers and retreated into the forest. He asserts that if they trace its path, they should be able to find it. Azella confesses she can barely manage tracking magic, asking Marvin, who admits he cannot either. Stepping forward, Turan volunteers to locate the beast. Sifting through carriage remnants, Azella questions if he hails from a tracker bloodline. He simply picks up a small piece of cloth, explaining he frequently uses this method and is accustomed to it. Closing his eyes, he inhales the scent before activating a search spell. A glowing blue trail manifests before him. He points toward the forest, leading the group onward. The trail ends at a river, where Turan notes the creature apparently washed its body. Azella scoffs at the idea of a beast intentionally evading detection. Turan suggests it may have simply chosen to wash itself. Suddenly, the blue lines flare again, and Turan warns the group that the beast is behind them. A massive monkey monster with glowing red eyes emerges roaring, raising massive stones above its head. Knights shout for everyone to dodge. The stones fly with terrifying speed, striking anyone unprepared with severe force. Turan barely evades the first attack, but his shock grows at the sheer destructive power. Azella and Marvin fail to dodge, using nearby knights as shields, causing those knights severe injury. Once the initial assault ceases, Azella tosses aside the knight she had shielded herself with. Turan finally comprehends that his mother's caution was not unfounded. Azella screams for an attack. The remaining able knights charge the monster, yet it suddenly flees. The knights give chase. Meanwhile, Turan readies a small rock in his sling. Azella and Marvin pursue, but the beast's speed overwhelms them. Azella panics, fearing they will lose it. When the rock launches, it flies faster than perception, allowing no reaction, striking the monster straight through as it emits a pained roar. Azella and Marvin glance back to see Turan walking calmly while spinning his sling. He glances upward as the monster screams again. Turan looks up as the monster lets out another deafening scream, the sound echoing across the battlefield as the monkey-like beast collapses heavily onto the ground, its massive frame trembling. Azella instantly seizes the opportunity without hesitation, extending her hand forward as her mana surges violently, an overwhelming torrent of fire erupting into existence, the flames twisting and coiling as they take the form of a roaring dragon that surges toward the helpless creature. Yet the monster can do nothing but stare, its body already shattered from Turan's earlier attack, unable to even muster the strength to move. And the moment the blazing dragon crashes into it, a massive explosion erupts, fire consuming everything in its path as the monster is completely obliterated, leaving nothing behind but burning remnants. Turan watches the flames carefully, realizing in that instant that he is witnessing the bloodline ability of House Voltas pyromaniacs. The knights finally allow themselves to breathe now that the threat is gone, tension leaving their bodies as relief spreads across the field. Azella glances at Turan and admits that for a moment she actually felt chills when his rock came flying toward them. Marvin quickly jumps in, teasingly asking if his sister got scared, only for Azella to snap back at him to shut up, declaring that he was the one who screamed like a little girl. Marvin immediately protests in disbelief, questioning when he ever did something like that. While around them, the knights begin tending to the wounded, the aftermath revealing the harsh cost of battle. Several men nursing broken arms as one veteran barks at them to stop whining, pointing out that someone else lost an entire arm and asking for spare bandages, while another knight struggles to stop the bleeding from a head wound, prompting others to suggest using medicine as quickly as possible. Turan observes the chaotic scene, quietly noting to himself that this is a complete mess. It was a sudden ambush by a monster. But even so, this was a battle where such severe injuries could have been avoided entirely. His gaze shifts toward Azella and Marvin as a thought crosses his mind, considering that their bodies should be far stronger due to their mana, making them several times tougher than ordinary knights. And yet, despite that advantage, they did not hesitate to use those weaker than them as shields. Marvin notices Turan staring and asks if something is wrong, but Turan simply brushes it off, saying it is nothing, before Azella calls him over, explaining that the most important part now is to absorb the monster's mana, welcoming him to the absorption party, and he agrees without hesitation. The three gather around the remains of the monster, raising their hands as they begin absorbing the lingering mana, Turan reflecting as the process begins, recalling that the books were correct, even when multiple people absorb mana at once. The degree of enhancement does not decrease. Azella is the first to stop, frustration clear on her face as she complains that she has already reached her limit, cursing her disappointing growth ceiling. Marvin follows shortly after, reaching his own limit, but Turan continues naturally, his absorption showing no signs of slowing, prompting Azella to finally understand why her father insisted on bringing him along. As the sun begins to set, the group makes their way back to the capital, the tension of battle slowly fading behind them. As they travel, Marvin reflects on the fight, admitting they would have never defeated the monster without Turan, crediting him for everything from tracking it down to delivering the decisive blow. But Turan quickly shuts him down, insisting it was nothing impressive, admitting instead that he regrets noticing the monster too late and allowing it to strike first, as he had not expected it to possess a search ability. Marvin reacts with surprise, asking if it really had such an ability, and Turan confirms it, explaining that monsters often awaken abilities based on their physical traits, pointing out the creature's unusually large hands and eyes, features that were not part of its original form, suggesting it gained the ability to throw objects with immense force and see across long distances or through dense forests. Marvin is impressed by how quickly Turan figured it all out, but Turan simply explains that he read about it in a monster encyclopedia at the library earlier. Marvin dismisses the library as a boring place no one visits, while Azella admits she went once out of curiosity but found the books too difficult and left before finishing even half a volume. Turan suggests that next time she should ask the librarian for easier books, but Azella looks confused, questioning whether such a person even exists, leaving Turan equally puzzled. Later, as he returns to the librarian greets him by name the moment he enters, causing him to realize he made a careless mistake, knowing that no knight or commoner would ever address a noble so casually, everyone in the city using formal titles instead, and he also cannot ignore that her appearance hardly matches that of a typical librarian. He asks how she knows his name, and she looks surprised before smiling, asking if he only just noticed, explaining that she saw it on his permit, and that as long as it is within the library, her gaze can reach anywhere. When Turan asks how he should address her, she casually states she does not really have a name and tells him he can call her anything he wants, even suggesting something playful like my love, but Turan firmly decides to simply call her librarian. She calls him stiff, teasing that it is strange for him to act polite after having used her for days, ordering her around to do this and that, though Turan denies ever doing such a thing, asking her not to come so close as it feels burdensome. He then questions if she is a wizard from the old empire, but she calmly denies it, explaining that she was never human to begin with, revealing that she is a type of spirit, and asking if that suits her. She elaborates further, explaining that when a soul inhabits something living, it becomes a living spirit, but when it inhabits something neither alive nor dead, it becomes a regular spirit, meaning the library itself is her true form, while this human appearance exists only for easier communication based on the user's preferences. She smiles as she hints that his preferences are rather telling, but Turan quickly shuts her down, accusing her of making things up, though she insists she is simply reflecting him like water. Turan studies her carefully before placing his hand on her stomach, only for it to pass right through her body, leaving him momentarily stunned as she reacts, asking where he is touching and complaining that it feels strange. Turan immediately apologizes while she continues grumbling about how frustrating it is that she cannot directly interfere with intruders, claiming she would have punished every person who dared steal books if she had the power. Turan notes that it seems House Valtis is unaware of her existence, and she explains that until now no one qualified to perceive her, her creator ensuring that only those who surpass a certain level of completeness could see her. She finds it romantic that Turan is the only one capable of doing so. When he asks what she means by completeness, she explains it is what wizards call a bloodline, prompting him to ask about his own, but she suggests he ask his parents instead, only for Turan to reveal he is an orphan. At this, the spirit's expression shifts slightly as she offers to check for him, explaining that she only needs his consent to examine his body. Turan questions what she means, but she simply laughs before suddenly thrusting her hand into his chest, passing through him completely, and leaving him shocked. She laughs again, saying that they are now connected, while Turan awkwardly tells her not to say things like that, though he realizes it does not hurt at all. She explains that while his bloodline contains several minor traits, the dominant ones are the pursuer and hunter types, asking if that aligns with House Zahar, and he confirms it does. However, she adds that there is another bloodline present, revealing that he is mixed. When Turan asks what that means, she explains he is the result of two different bloodlines, though the second one remains locked, noting that such cases are not uncommon, and that it will awaken naturally as he grows stronger. Turan reflects on his mother, remembering how she always seemed too refined and educated to be a mere commoner, making him wonder if she was once part of a noble lineage whose bloodline had weakened over generations. He thanks the spirit for the information, but she playfully demands that he stay for another month if he is truly grateful. From that point onward, Turan no longer studies alone, frequently asking her about the contents of the books and seeking deeper explanations, questioning whether countless invisible substances truly exist in the world. The librarian begins sharing knowledge from ancient texts long lost to time, teaching him that by manipulating water and observing through it, he can directly perceive these unseen elements. Turan quickly realizes that these lessons on the laws of nature are treasures beyond measure, gaining understanding of how diseases originate from microorganisms, how decay is caused by the activity of germs, and grasping principles such as the refraction of light, the generation of heat through friction, and the processes behind injury and healing. Driven by curiosity, Turan decides to experiment with decay, placing his hand on an apple before him as it rapidly begins to rot, the transformation occurring almost instantly. The librarian asks about his progress, and Turan admits that it is incredible. While magic could already produce similar effects, understanding the underlying principles allows him to achieve the same results with far less mana. In that moment, he realizes that simply changing the way he perceives the world has elevated his abilities as a wizard to an entirely new level. The librarian notes with quiet disappointment that the level of human knowledge continues to decline as time passes, her tone carrying a subtle understanding of why that is the case. And as their conversation lingers, Turan eventually announces that it is time for him to leave, explaining that the owner of this place has been subtly urging him to go. The spirit of the librarian immediately reacts, pleading with him to take her along as she rushes forward in an attempt to embrace him, yet her body passes straight through his, causing her to stumble and fall onto the floor. Turan looks down and calmly asks if she is even capable of leaving the library, and she admits that she cannot, her voice filled with frustration and longing as she begs him to stay, promising that she will take good care of him if he does, but Turan gently refuses, his tone soft yet firm as he tells her he will have to decline, before shifting the conversation and encouraging him to explore the world beyond, suggesting that somewhere out there may exist remnants of a god's legacy, and perhaps even spirits who possess knowledge far greater than her own. Turan assures her that he will return from time to time, though she tells him to come whenever he pleases or not at all, masking her sadness behind casual words as it becomes clear she does not want to see him go. Turan offers a small smile in response, mentioning that there are still countless books he has yet to read, before finally turning away and leaving the city behind. Guided by the continental map he obtained from the library, his destination set toward House Zahar's base located in the Enril Desert to the east of Orem, as he begins his journey with a clear purpose in mind, determined to uncover the truth about his parents. As Turan walks, he notes there is no need to rush. If the clues were going to disappear, they would have vanished sometime over the last 18 years, and if they are still there, arriving later will not make them vanish now. He continues to train, killing monsters and absorbing their mana. As he travels through the woods, he suddenly hears a horse neighing and wonders what is happening. He spots a majestic horse with a saddle and realizes it is not attacking the man lying on the ground but protecting him from attackers. One attacker calls it a demon, asking what kind of pet monster could be that strong. Turan watches closely, wondering if the horse itself is the true target. Suddenly he recognizes the attackers as two dark elves, as one tells the other to create an opening somehow, while the other replies it is easier said than done. One dark elf uses magic as purple energy spreads, and monsters begin rising from the ground. Turan realizes this is the dark elf necromancy he once read about in a book. He hesitates, wondering if he should intervene, thinking the man on the ground may have attacked first. Then his eyes widen as he sees one of the elves eating a human arm. The first asks whose hand it is, demanding a share, while the other tells her to eat her own, since she must have taken some already. Disgust floods Turan as he realizes they are cannibals. Activating his stealth magic, he vanishes from sight while the female elf complains that the men she killed were too hairy. As the male elf takes his final bite, Turan strikes instantly, killing him before the female can react. The summoned monsters vanish as the elf panics, commanding her beasts to gather and protect her. Turan hurls a rock, but a monster blocks it with its horn. The elf shouts, demanding to know who is there, ordering them to reveal themselves as a buffalo monster charges, destroying trees in its path. She realizes her attacker is using stealth and declares she will expose him, summoning a wolf monster. It releases a glowing orange aura that spreads across the area, revealing Turan as his invisibility fades. The elf spots him and shouts that she has found the demon, commanding her monsters to attack. Turan rubs his hands together, igniting flames, and unleashes an explosion, knocking out the wolf while the buffalo remains unfazed. It charges and Turan barely dodges, falling to the ground. Realizing how fast they are, and thinking it was wise to eliminate one elf earlier, suddenly pain shoots through his leg as the wolf bites down. Turan kicks it away and rises, but the buffalo slams into him, sending him crashing into a tree. Coughing blood, he collapses, surrounded by monsters and the elf. She laughs, saying it serves him right, asking how he dared to kill Kel and vowing to make him beg for death. Then suddenly the horse strikes, smashing into her head, crushing it as she screams while being trampled. The beasts turn to attack the horse, allowing the elf to recover. She calls it humiliating and swears to kill Turan, but before she can act, he launches another attack that connects instantly, blasting off her head and ending her life. As her body falls, the summoned monsters vanish. Exhausted, Turan collapses, realizing how much the battle drained him. The horse approaches, gently nudging his head, and Turan thanks it. Later that night, the unconscious blonde youth awakens by a campfire, groaning before jumping in surprise. He sees Turan sitting across from him, who calmly tells him he is finally awake. The boy asks who he is, and Turan explains he saw him being attacked by dark elves and intervened to save him. The horse approaches and the boy pets her, calling her Tilly. Turan remarks she is a good horse, not only protecting her master but moving him to safety. The boy thanks him and introduces himself as Assis of Hausberg, prompting Turan to introduce himself in return. Turan asks why Assis came into conflict with the Dark Elves, and Assis explains there was no reason, as he was on a pilgrimage with retainers when they were ambushed without warning. Assis begins to cry, saying he heard other races were savage but never imagined it would be this terrible. He mourns his fallen companions, explaining they were precious to him and had raised him since childhood. Turan asks if they were his family, and Assis replies they were knights and servants who accompanied him and were like family. Turan notes Assis seems like a good person and asks how many Dark Elves there were. Assis says the two Turan killed should be all of them. Turan uses his search spell, confirming no others remain nearby. Assis asks if Turan has urgent business, and he replies he is also on a pilgrimage. Assis is amazed that someone on such a journey possesses such strength, wondering if he is from a great house and why he travels alone. Turan replies it is difficult to explain, insisting he is not that strong, saying he only ambushed one elf and barely survived the other. With the help of the red horse, he releases his mana, and Assis does the same as they gauge each other power. Turan is shocked by the immense mana Assis possesses, realizing without absorbing the elves' mana he would have far less. Assis, on the other hand, believes Turan raw mana alone would prevent him from being overwhelmed by two necromancers, deducing he must be of noble blood and has not yet reached his full potential. He wonders why someone like that travels alone, before asking if Turan would accept an invitation to Hausberg, promising repayment for saving his life and requesting safe escort back home. Turan asks what he means by repayment, and Assis grins, declaring that Hausberg are enchanters and vassals of Arabian, the great northern house. Explaining their lineage has crafted magic tools for generations, he promises to create the finest magic tool worthy of Turan abilities. Sometime later, they ventured deeper into the forest and buried the subordinates of Assis who had been slain by the Dark Elves. Assis let out a quiet sigh, observing that things finally seemed to be coming to an end, his voice carrying a faint sense of relief. Yet a heavier thought lingered in his mind. He admitted that if he could, he would send everyone back to their hometowns, though he acknowledged that it would not be easy. Turning to Turan, he expressed his gratitude. Turan glanced at him, slightly puzzled, and asked what he meant. Assis hesitated before answering that it was because Turan had not mocked him. Despite being a noble, he had cried over the sacrifices of his subordinates, something he considered pathetic. Turan questioned why he would think that way, and Assis quietly replied that it was what his father had taught him. Turan listened silently before a warm smile spread across his face. He told Aziz that such feelings were not weakness, but kindness. Taken aback, Aziz tried to lighten the atmosphere, suggesting they speak more casually since they would be traveling together anyway. He pointed out that the age gap between them was not that large, and Turan gave a small nod in agreement. Aziz smiled, raised his hand and said he looked forward to working with him as a friend. Turan paused for a moment, repeating the word friend to himself before reaching out and shaking his hand, saying he felt the same. After some time, Aziz suggested they take a rest before continuing their journey. They stopped nearby where Turan noticed a box on the ground and asked about it. Aziz opened it to reveal food and wine, explaining that it was a cold storage chest he had prepared during their last visit to the city. Turan wondered if it remained cold inside at all times, and Aziz confirmed that it did, adding that most food could be preserved for about a week without issue. He explained that cold meals could also be reheated and proceeded to demonstrate other tools. One released water at the press of a button, another could create a shelter using gathered wood, and a third would sound an alarm when someone approached. Growing excited, Aziz gestured toward his clothes and explained that they were also a magic tool, one that cleaned itself automatically. Turan observed that such tools were not common and remarked that it was impressive, saying even a single set of clothing like that would be worth saving his life. Aziz smiled at that and insisted his life was worth far more, promising to reward him with something much better once they returned to the main house. He added that if the house refused, he would craft the items himself. Changing the subject, he mentioned that during their travels he had witnessed so many types of Turan's magic that he had lost count. He began listing them: animal control, freezing, levitation, liquid manipulation, enhancement, luminescence, restraint, instant death, terrain transformation, and lightning strikes. He then asked whether Turan had spent his entire life mastering magic or if he possessed a bloodline ability that allowed him to wield any form of magic. Turan narrowed his eyes and mentally noted that he could not answer such a question. He reminded Aziz that they had agreed not to pry into each other's family matters. Aziz quickly laughed it off, saying he was only joking, and that such a bloodline likely did not exist anyway. He then asked Turan's age, noting that he did not appear older than 30, though he wondered if he might have lived for 80 years. Turan replied that he had about a month left before his birthday and would be turning 18. Aziz was completely shocked and revealed that he himself would be turning 43 that year, though he laughed and said a 25-year difference did not matter much to them. Crossing his arms, he remarked that he should have known Turan possessed such immense magical power after witnessing him defeat 2 wraith sorcerers. He added that he had not expected there to be another genius like him in the world. Turan asked what he meant, and Aziz explained that the other person was someone close to him who possessed an extraordinary bloodline, his cousin. Turan wondered if he could ask her to craft magic tools, but Aziz shook his head, explaining that she belonged to the main house. Turan then inquired about the main house, and Aziz explained that his cousin was a princess of Erebion who might one day become the head of a great house. As they continued walking, Aziz elaborated that unlike ordinary wizard houses, leadership in great houses was not easily passed down to direct children. There were dozens of relatives in the same generation, and naturally, at least one of them would often surpass the head's own offspring in strength. However, among the current generation, Maisa had been born with the greatest talent. After awakening her magic, she mastered all forms of combat magic within just 10 years. Turan was surprised, and Aziz added that because of this she received full support from the house. At only 21 years old, she was already nearly on par with its core members. Turan considered the level of power she must possess at such an age and then asked if the house had held a funeral. Aziz then pointed ahead, noting that they were almost there. Turan looked up as Aziz explained that they had reached the Dakin Plains, the central territory of Arabian. Eventually they arrived at Zavalin, the territory of House Berg. As they entered the mansion, a woman rushed out in distress, asking what had happened. Aziz embraced her and began to cry. Turan watched quietly, noting that despite being 43, Aziz reacted this way. A bearded man approached and told Aziz to maintain his dignity and at least address her as his mother. Aziz apologized before introducing Turan as a friend from the south, who had risked his life to save him, saying that without him, he would not have made it back alive. His mother remarked that the pilgrimage route was not supposed to be so dangerous, and asked what had occurred. Aziz revealed that they had been attacked by dark elf wraith sorcerers. She grew furious, calling them filthy creatures, and declaring that she would gather an army to tear them apart. The man from earlier addressed her as the head of the house and urged her to compose herself as others were watching. He then turned to Turan and asked which house he belonged to. Turan replied that he could not say. When pressed, he admitted that he did not know, explaining that he had been born to a commoner mother and had no knowledge of his father. Aziz was shocked and asked why he had never mentioned this, but Turan simply replied that it was not something worth boasting about. The head of House Berg observed him carefully and declared that since he had saved her son, she would ensure he was properly rewarded. She explained that it would be difficult to host him within the mansion, but she would arrange for him to stay at the finest inn in the city. Asura became frustrated and asked why they could not host him at home. His mother explained that under normal circumstances it would be fine, but they currently had an important guest staying with them. Given the situation, it was difficult to allow a stranger of unknown origin to remain in the house, and she hoped he would understand. At that moment, a voice interrupted, saying she need not worry, as someone who had saved Asura would hardly attempt to assassinate her. A woman dressed in black appeared. Asaz immediately recognized her as Maisa and asked why she had suddenly come. Turan observed the Princess of Arabayon and thought that in her current state she resembled a corpse more than royalty. Maisa explained that she had come to hide after nearly being assassinated by Zahar's agents. Asaz was shocked that such an attack had occurred at the main house, and questioned whether there might be an insider, given its strong defenses. Maisa replied that there was likely an insider, as the main house had more than a few individuals with questionable loyalties. Declaring that she was tired, she excused herself and retired for the night, wishing everyone a good evening. Afterward, Az's mother called for her maid, Ina, and instructed her to show Turan to the second-best guest room in the house. The following day, Turan awoke in a grand room. After resting, he walked through the hallway, where he encountered Azaz once again. Azaz noted that Turan was up early, as usual, and asked what he was doing alone. Turan pointed to a magic lantern mounted on the wall, saying he found it interesting. Azaz explained that he occasionally made such items for practice and offered it to him. Turan replied that he was not particularly interested. Suddenly, a massive flash of lightning illuminated the hallway through the windows. Turan looked on in confusion as Azaz explained that it was Maisa practicing magic, noting her constant diligence. Turan asked if that was the Arabian bloodline ability, and Azaz confirmed that it was the Storm bloodline. He admitted that while he had never disliked his own bloodline, he could not help but feel slightly envious, as she seemed to be becoming something akin to a god. Curious, Turan wondered how powerful the next leader of Arabian truly was. Azaz asked if he wanted to see for himself, but Turan replied that although he was curious, it might not be wise for someone of unknown origin like him to approach her. Azaz dismissed the concern, saying it did not matter since he was not an assassin and insisted he could vouch for him. He then admitted that he was curious about who would be stronger between Turan and Maisa. Turan remarked that this was likely the real reason Azaz had brought him here. Azaz laughed and admitted that he had been holding a grudge for years and wanted to see Maisa frustrated for once. They head toward the training grounds where Maisa is already standing. Aziz calls out to her, and she turns, asking who the person beside him is. Turan introduces himself, and Maisa repeats his name, recalling him from the previous night, before asking what brings them there. Aziz explains that they saw her practicing magic and thought they would join her like they used to. However, Maisa reminds him that the last time they did that, he stormed off in tears after she learned something in 2 attempts that had taken him an entire week. Turan lets out a laugh, prompting Aziz to glance back at him. He quickly apologizes, but Aziz asks if he is mocking him as well, before turning back to Maisa. He boldly declares that Turan possesses unmatched magical talent and suggests that they have a duel. Maisa repeats the word duel and fixes her gaze on Turan in silence. Her eyes begin to glow blue as her mana surges outward. Turan looks up as the sky darkens and a lightning storm forms overhead. As her mana continues to rise, it becomes increasingly overwhelming, making her presence feel monstrous. The sheer pressure causes Turan's body to stiffen, his eyes widening as he struggles to endure it. When the display finally subsides, he is left panting and drenched in sweat from the intensity. After a brief silence, Maisa looks at him and admits that she dislikes saying it, but she does not believe he is a match for her. She apologizes, stating that it would likely be difficult for him to duel her. Turan remains silent, staring at her with a focused and determined expression. Aziz steps forward with a grin, saying that while Turan may not rival her in raw magical power, his true strength lies in his ability to learn magic. Placing a hand on Turan's shoulder, Aziz proclaims that he is a genius unlike any he has ever seen. He turns to Maisa and asks whether even she could match that level of talent. Maisa responds that since Aziz is praising him so highly, they might as well see what he can do. Turan meets her gaze and proposes a different approach to the duel. He suggests that instead of fighting directly, they each demonstrate a spell the other likely does not know, and whoever performs it faster would be the winner. He asks for her opinion, noting that it seems like a fair method. Maisa considers this and points out that Turan does not even understand the magic of his own bloodline yet. She adds that it would be unfair if she used her innate magic, so she decides to exclude it from the contest. Declaring that she will go first, she steps forward onto the training ground. Maisa taps the stone floor with her foot and a small sprout suddenly pushes through the surface. Turan and Aziz watch as the tiny plant rapidly grows, transforming into massive vines that spread across the courtyard. Aziz cries out in alarm as the vines coil around him and lift him high into the air, leaving him hanging upside down. Maisa looks at Turan and identifies the spell as plant creation and manipulation magic, asking if he can replicate it. Aziz shouts desperately, begging to be let down as dizziness overtakes him, but she ignores him and casually tells him to remain like that for a moment since it is amusing. Meanwhile, Turan studies the vines closely, reflecting on the principles of magic. Fire magic is simply the manifestation of burning, while water magic draws invisible moisture from the air. He crouches and places his hand against the stone floor, realizing that this magic is not true creation but accelerated growth. He concludes that the vines are formed by forcing seeds already present in the ground to sprout instantly. In other words, it is not creation, but growth. Focusing his mind, he commands the seed to grow, and a bright blue pulse of mana radiates outward. In an instant, several blue vines burst from the ground, weaving smoothly around him. Maisa watches in shock as the plants respond perfectly to his control. Aziz is equally stunned. Maisa realizes that by instructing the plant to grow, Turan has independently grasped the true nature of the magic. She asks if he has seen this spell before, but he replies that this is his first time encountering it. She lets out a quiet hum, remarking that for once Assiz's earlier praise seems to have been accurate. Releasing her magic, she allows the vines to loosen, and Aziz drops to the ground, groaning in pain as he recovers. She steadies herself and tells Turan that it is now his turn to present a challenge. Turan considers his options, knowing that using Zahar's bloodline magic here would be too dangerous. Suddenly an idea comes to him. Extending his hand toward the tall grass, he summons a small rat that scurries toward him. Maisa watches skeptically, asking if this is merely animal control magic and whether this is the best he can do. Turan catches the rat and grips it firmly, explaining that it is not the magic itself, but rather an ingredient. As he activates his spell, a blue energy pulses around the struggling creature. Its life force is drained rapidly, and its body shrivels, turning into a dry husk within his grasp. Holding up the lifeless form, Turan calmly declares that he has completed his magic. Maisa observes him seriously before stating that it is now her turn. With a simple gesture, she calls over another rat and grasps it, attempting to replicate the same spell. However, nothing happens. She closes her eyes and concentrates, realizing that this is no ordinary magic and wondering how he achieved it. Nearby, Aziz watches with discomfort, questioning why Turan would use such disturbing magic. Turan admits it was simply the first idea that came to mind when asked. He then looks at Maisa, wondering if even a great house like Arabayan is unfamiliar with this principle. Aziz suggests that since it is not working, they should concede victory to Turan. Maisa sharply tells him to be quiet, asking if he truly believes she cannot perform it. She reflects on the nature of magic, understanding that causality is a complex factor. If the intended effect aligns with natural phenomena, the spell becomes more efficient. Recognizing the cause behind the magical effect is crucial, as it determines both success and mana consumption. Lacking that understanding, one can compensate by pouring in a vast amount of mana to overcome inefficiencies. Determined, Maisa commands the rat to rot while still alive. Suddenly the creature shrieks as its flesh decays rapidly, transforming into a dried husk just like the one Turan created. Aziz exclaims that it worked, and Maisa exhales, admitting in a tired voice that she managed to do it. However, almost immediately, a wave of exhaustion overtakes her, her vision blurs, and she collapses onto the ground. Aziz shouts her name and rushes to her side. Turan joins him, crouching beside her unconscious form. He begins to consider the cause, questioning whether she used too much mana. He reflects that people do not usually faint solely from mana depletion, as it typically results in exhaustion rather than complete collapse. Observing her more closely, he notices her condition and identifies the real issue. She is suffering from a lack of physical nutrients. Without hesitation, Turan lifts her into his arms and asks Aziz if there is a mage nearby with a healing bloodline. Aziz replies that there is no one like that in the area. Turan instructs him to have water and salt brought to her room immediately, along with the adults. As he carries her, he realizes how incredibly light she is, so much so that she feels more like a lamb than a person. Even the mana she had been using to barely sustain a body that should not have been able to stand was now completely depleted. After some time, Maisa slowly opened her eyes. Aziz's mother, her aunt, rushed into the bedroom, calling out her name in alarm and asking if she was conscious. Maisa, still disoriented, questioned why she was there. The woman explained that Aziz had informed her that she had suddenly fainted while training magic with their guest. As Maisa recalled what had happened, her aunt pressed further, asking if it was true and whether the man had done anything to her. Maisa firmly denied it, stating that it was not his fault at all and that it had simply been her own mistake. She then asked everyone to leave, saying her head was throbbing painfully. Her aunt lingered for a moment, placing a bowl of soup beside her and reminding her that although she often neglected eating due to magic, she still needed to care for her health. She gently urged her to eat at least a little before finally leaving the room. Maisa watched her go and softly expressed her thanks. Turning her attention to the bowl, she lifted it and took a spoonful of the warm soup. However, the moment she tasted it, a terrifying memory surged through her mind, her mother and sister being attacked, crying out for her to save them. Believing she could, a sharp pain gripped her as she groaned, losing control of the bowl. It slipped from her hands, crashing onto the floor and shattering. She struggled to calm herself, trying to steady her breathing. Meanwhile, Turan had been taken and locked in the Berg family's basement, where he found himself inside the temple of the limping goddess. He stood before a massive winged statue bathed in golden light. A guard dressed in black drew his sword and informed Turan that both the doors and walls were completely solid without a single crack. He remarked that they were as strong as muscles trained over hundreds of years and warned Turan to abandon any thoughts of breaking in or escaping. The man introduced himself as Hiram Berg. Turan calmly replied that he understood and had no intention of attempting anything. Hiram emphasized just how solid the structure was, to which Turan agreed, though Hiram stepped closer and stressed that it was extremely so. Turan found himself wondering if the guard was boasting. Without warning, Hiram performed a swift slash with his sword, and Turan's eyes instinctively followed the motion. Curious, he asked what he was doing. Hiram answered simply that he was training. His movements flowed rhythmically, each strike and step blending seamlessly into the next. Turan observed closely, realizing that there was not a single wasted motion. Every movement was the minimum required to generate force for the next strike. He wondered if this was the efficiency of a truly trained body. Hiram eventually stopped and turned to him. Turan quickly apologized, asking if he had interrupted. Hiram shook his head and instead asked what Turan had seen in his movements. Stepping extremely close, he waited for an answer. Turan responded that he found it incredible. Haram stepped back and explained that most nobles dismissed martial arts as insignificant because it was easier to attack from a distance using magic. He claimed this was because their bodies were weak and their minds could not fully command them, forcing them to rely on cheap tricks. Turan acknowledged that unless one had a bloodline specialized in physical combat such as the Hercules strength bloodline, focusing on magic was often the more efficient path. However, he added that in trials there would inevitably be situations one could not avoid facing directly. Haram extended his sword toward Turan, instructing him to hold it. Turan questioned whether it was wise to hand a weapon to someone considered suspicious, especially when he had been brought here to be confined. Haram smiled and dismissed the concern, saying the weapon was merely a piece of iron. What made it a sword was the body of the person wielding it, and with Turan's current physical condition, he would not be able to harm him anyway. Turan took hold of the blade, wondering what he could possibly do with it. Suddenly, a surge of blue mana erupted from his body, engulfing him in a blazing aura as he gripped the sword tightly and stared at Haram. The intense energy radiated outward, but Haram immediately shouted for him to stop, saying it was wrong to pour mana into the weapon. Turan complied at once, suppressing his energy. Haram stepped closer and began adjusting Turan's posture by hand. He instructed him to shift more weight onto his front leg and press down so the ground could absorb the force. He corrected the position of his elbow, warning that if it rose too high, his weak structure would not be able to handle the sword's weight. He added that at this rate his thigh would be easily pierced in combat, telling him to raise his arm and not limit himself. Haram guided him through each motion. Turan responded obediently, and Haram nodded in approval, instructing him to perform 10 repetitions. He reminded him not to interrupt his breathing, and to direct it into his muscles. Observing him, Haram noted that Turan had a well-built vessel, and thought that, given the chance, he should thoroughly refine that body. He declared that mana was nothing more than a superficial trick, and that wizards mistakenly believed their physical abilities were guaranteed, when in reality it was only the bare minimum their bodies could achieve. A properly trained body, he insisted, could dominate the battlefield without relying on mana, and Turan needed to understand that distinction. Breathing heavily from the exertion, Turan acknowledged his words. At that moment, the heavy doors of the temple opened, drawing Turan's attention. Aziz's mother entered, bowing deeply as she approached and asking for forgiveness, saying she had committed an unforgivable act toward their benefactor. Turan remained composed and replied that he should be the one apologizing, assuming that the young lady was unharmed. As a guest, he admitted his behavior had been inappropriate. The head of House Berg explained that Maisa wished to offer him a proper apology and asked if he would be available. Later, Turan found himself alone with Maisa in a grand parlor. She stood by a large window, remarking that the situation was troublesome and that she had heard he was confined in the temple because of her. She apologized for causing such unnecessary trouble. Turan approached her and replied that it had been necessary, adding that he was simply glad she was safe. She then asked about the magic he used the previous day, the one that caused animals to rot, and wondered if it was an undisclosed bloodline ability. She pointed out that the mana consumption had been extraordinarily high, and questioned whether he had deceived her. Turan denied this, explaining that once the principle was understood, it could be used with ease. She considered this and remarked that it seemed he was unwilling to teach it freely, noting that without revealing the method there was no proof it was not bloodline magic. Turan responded that he did not particularly care whether he won or lost. Confused, she asked what he meant, saying that if things ended this way, it would reflect poorly on her as the Princess of Arabian. She then proposed a deal. If he revealed the secret behind that magic, she would teach him one of Arabian's secret techniques in return. Turan agreed without hesitation. He began explaining that the foundation of the spell was essentially bio-enhancement magic. He asked whether she had used microorganisms that were invisible to the eye, and she confirmed that she had. Realizing this, she was shocked, understanding that this hidden factor explained the high efficiency. Letting out a frustrated sigh, she admitted that the loss was hers, as her success had relied purely on overwhelming force. Turan suggested that he had considered that within the terms of their wager, but she insisted that it was not the same. She explained that when evaluating magical skill, recklessly pouring out large amounts of mana did not count. Slightly embarrassed, she asked if he could tell Aziz that the match had ended in a draw, as she did not want him becoming arrogant over a victory. Turan agreed. She then decided to provide his compensation and picked up a comb, demonstrating by rubbing it against a surface. She explained that when objects were rubbed together like this, they would attract one another. Confidently, she began to explain the principle, but Turan interrupted her, stating that it was static electricity. Her expression froze in shock as she asked if he already knew about it, and he confirmed that he did. Muttering under her breath, she remarked that this was considered one of their more profound secret arts. She then admitted she would need more time to determine how to repay him, as she now had to find something he did not already know. She suggests that until she can think of proper compensation, they should train together from now on. She quickly adds that this is merely to repay her debt and not because she particularly wants him around. Turan responds with a warm smile and agrees. The scene shifts to a vast dining hall filled with an overwhelming spread of gourmet dishes. Aziz's mother modestly remarks that the table is nothing special and urges Turan to eat his fill. Aziz stares at the feast in disbelief, asking why she prepared something so extravagant, noting that he has not even seen such a spread on his own birthday. He jokes that anyone seeing this would think the Lord of Arabian himself had come to visit. His mother quickly tells him to be quiet. Turan studies the table, recognizing that this is far from an ordinary meal. The head of the house turns back to Turan and brings up their earlier discussion. She asks if it is true that her son promised a powerful magic tool in exchange for saving his life. Turan confirms that it is. She then asks if he has something specific in mind. Turan replies that he wants something that enhances defense, explaining that while it is easy to harm others with magic, protecting oneself is much more difficult. Ideally, it should be capable of guarding against surprise attacks. The mother nods, saying she has crafted similar items before, so it should not be too difficult. However, she notes that nothing suitable is ready immediately. Aziz suddenly speaks up, asking if he can make the item himself for Turan, but his mother quickly shuts him down. At that moment, Aziz's brother, Mello, raises his hand and offers to create it instead, explaining that he has just completed a commission from the main house and currently has free time. Their mother asks how he plans to proceed. Mello explains that for protection against sudden attacks, it would be best to create something Turan can carry at all times. He intends to embed mana into jewelry such as rings, earrings, or necklaces, forming a function that draws out the defensive power of a guardian bloodline. Their mother considers this acceptable and asks how long it will take. Mello answers that it will require 1 month. She remarks that although it is unseemly for a parent to boast, Mello is already a skilled wizard not far behind her in ability. Hearing this, Turan realizes just how significant this gift is, thinking that a magic tool crafted over a full month by the head wizard of an enchanter house is far beyond what he expected. He speaks up, expressing his gratitude while wondering if it might be excessive. The mother raises an eyebrow and asks if he truly thinks so, questioning whether that would mean her son's life is worth so little. She insists that it is not excessive at all. The next morning, Turan and Aziz walk through the lively streets of the kingdom. Aziz comments that it seems his mother has taken quite a liking to him. He admits that he spoke at length about Turan before going to bed, praising his talent and dedication to training. Originally, she intended to look down on him as a wandering noble without backing, but her perspective has since changed. Turan observes that it sounds like she is attempting to recruit him into their house. Aziz confirms this, explaining that she often gives generously, places people in her debt, and then introduces a beautiful young woman as a way to tempt them into staying. He adds that several adults in the house join through such means. Turan remarks that this sounds troubling, but Aziz reassures him not to worry. He says the magic tool is simply a gesture to build goodwill, and promises that Turan will not be forced into marriage, even if he accepts it. He insists his mother is not so lacking in refinement. He then asks what Turan plans to do for the rest of the day. Turan replies that he promised to train with Lady Mesa in the evening. Seeing that there is still time before then, Aziz pulls him along, suggesting they patrol together instead. He claims that while this may not be the capital, there is still plenty to enjoy and jokes about whether Turan planned to spend the entire day practicing magic in a corner. Turan admits that was exactly his intention, but Aziz laughs and tells him life is too short not to enjoy, dragging him along. He first takes Turan to a casino filled with roulette tables and card games, but Turan refuses to participate. Later, they visit a lively bar, yet Turan still declines. They continue wandering through the marketplace until Turan suddenly stops, staring at a series of posters on a wall. His eyes widen in shock as he recognizes the face drawn on them, thinking of Kyorn. He wonders to himself if it could truly be that same Kyorn. Afterward, they attend a theatrical performance where swords clash dramatically as a story unfolds. It depicts the year 2095, when the warriors of Arabion ventured into a demonic desert, and a knight named Kyorn defeated the enemy with divine assistance after a fierce battle. At the end of the performance, Turan and Aziz applaud. Aziz asks if it was worth watching, and Turan replies that it was very good. He recalls Kyorn describing himself as merely an ordinary knight, and reflects on how unmatched his humility must be. He quietly vows that if he ever meets him, he will ask whether that story is truly accurate. Early the next morning, Turan opens his eyes to find Haram staring at him. Haram asks if he has rested well, and Turan confirms that he has before asking what brings him there. Haram explains that he noticed Turan has a strong physical foundation, and declares that it is time to strengthen it further, ordering him to follow. Turan asks if they are going to train, and Haram replies that the body does not grow stronger through rest, only through being tempered. He asks if Turan is unwilling, but Turan agrees, believing he will gain more from this than from leisure. At that moment, Aziz bursts into the room, calling Turan's name excitedly and saying he heard about an incredible performance happening today. However, upon seeing Haram, he freezes in surprise. Haram informs him that they are heading to train and tells Aziz that he should also temper his weak body, asking if he will join. Aziz immediately backs away with a frightened expression, quickly making an excuse that he just returned and has not recovered yet before fleeing at full speed. Turan watches him leave, confused by his reaction, but he soon understands why. He is forced into an intense weightlifting session, with Haram looming over him as he struggles through push-ups under massive weight. Haram orders him not to listen to his body's complaints and demands another repetition. Turan groans in pain, but Haram scolds him, saying that giving in to such minor discomfort means his mind is being controlled by weakness. At last, Haram allows him to stop, and Turan collapses onto the floor, gasping for air. Haram asks if it is tiring, and Turan struggles to answer yes. Haram then explains that Turan is fortunate, as for a wizard, undergoing such training once is sufficient. Turan wonders if it is different for those who are not wizards. Haram explains that ordinary bodies weaken over time even after being trained and require constant effort to maintain strength. However, for wizards, mana sustains the body in an optimal state, meaning that once it is properly forged, it does not deteriorate. He smiles and declares that Turan must now be fully rested. Turan looks at him in disbelief, trying to protest, but Hiram's expression darkens as he insists that Turan's body does not lie. He declares that Turan has rested enough, and now it is time to learn weapon combat. Turan cries out in exhaustion as the training intensifies. The following days at House Berg prove to be incredibly fulfilling. Each morning, Turan rises early to train with Hiram in a special space where gravity is amplified, making the body several times heavier. A single misstep could leave one crushed into the ground. In the evenings, he returns to train with Maisa, learning to generate electricity through friction as golden lightning crackles between her hands. Before long, 3 weeks pass. Turan attempts to launch a bolt of lightning at a target, but it misses. Maisa watches from behind and remarks that he seems to be struggling more than expected. Turan smiles, explaining that it is because he is not from Arabian. She admits that it is difficult for her to guide him as well, noting that she never considered aiming lightning magic in such a manner. She asks whether it does not simply strike upon release, but Turan explains that it is more complicated than it appears. Suddenly, someone calls out Maisa's name, and a man approaches. He looks at Turan and asks who he is, but Maisa responds coldly, saying it is none of his concern, and demanding to know why he is there. She reminds him that she instructed the main house not to disturb her while she was recovering. The man reveals that the patriarch has summoned her. She asks for the reason and warns him to be prepared for punishment if it is trivial. The knight delivers urgent news, reporting that dark elves have begun rampaging across the south. He states that 3 cities have already fallen, and that the main house is assembling an expedition force. The moment those words were spoken, Turan's expression hardened. The weight of the situation settled heavily over him. After hearing everything, Maisa acknowledged it with a quiet understanding and instructed that they be told she would return soon. Then, turning toward Turan, she added that she believed she needed to leave. Right after that, she clasped her hands together and looked straight at him, asking if he knew that electricity also flowed through the human body. Turan frowned in confusion and asked what she meant, clearly unfamiliar with the concept. Maisa calmly noted that it was only natural for him not to know, explaining that it was a closely guarded secret of the Arabian house. She then offered a proposal. If she taught it to him properly, his debt could be considered settled, assuring him that the knowledge would be of great use. Maisa began her explanation in a steady, composed tone, revealing everything she knew. She described how, whenever a person sees or feels something, that sensation sends a tiny electrical signal to the brain. If it comes through sight, the signal travels from the eyes to the brain. If it is a smell, it moves from the nose. She continued in detail. Turan listened intently. Then, as if trying to fully grasp the concept, he slowly closed his eyes. He repeated the idea in his mind, a tiny electrical signal, turning it over again and again, searching for its meaning. This electricity flowed throughout the entire body. If he could somehow accelerate those signals moving along those pathways. As that thought settled, a visible change began to occur. Faint at first, a subtle current seemed to ripple across his face, quickly growing stronger. In the next instant, his eyes flared with light, crackling with an energy like distant thunder. The air around him felt unnaturally still, as if the world itself had paused in response to the sudden surge of power. Standing before Maisa, Turan held that state. She watched him calmly and asked how he felt. Turan remained still, almost dazed, as though he had stepped into an entirely unfamiliar realm. A single thought echoed in his mind, questioning the strange sensation overtaking him. Then, without warning, a sharp pain pierced through his head. He clutched it immediately, struggling to endure the intense headache that followed. Maisa remarked that he had managed to pull it off, explaining that the strain came from recklessly expending his mana. She added that adjusting to it would be difficult at first due to the pain, but once he grew accustomed to it, he would be able to maintain the state for a considerable time. At that, Maisa let out a faint, amused smile as her body slowly rose into the air. She called it a simple investment, saying that since he showed potential, she would eventually collect everything back with interest, once he learned even greater spells in the future. With that, she shot into the sky and vanished in an instant. The scene shifted. Above stretched a vast, clear sky. Below, however, a massive crowd had gathered, filling the area with energy. It was revealed that this was Morgan City, the heart of the Day Plains. Though it was described as a departure ceremony to hunt dark elves, the atmosphere felt closer to a grand celebration. Amid the noise, someone suddenly spotted a figure riding on horseback. His face lit up with excitement as he called out, recognizing Maisa and trying to catch her attention. Before he could act, however, a man firmly grabbed his arm and reminded Aziz to maintain proper composure as a noble. At that moment, a loud announcement rang through the air, declaring the arrival of the head of the house. Instantly, silence fell. The soldiers snapped into formation. Watching from a distance, Turan realized that the man was Badal Arabian, the current head of the Arabian house. Even from afar, his piercing blue eyes stood out. Yet something about him seemed off. Turan quietly noted how pale he looked, wondering if his health had deteriorated. It was said that there had once been rumors of a severe injury he sustained while fighting the head of the Zahar house. But since so much time had passed, others believed it might simply be the toll of age. The head of the house slowly raised his hand. In response, every soldier moved as one. Then all eyes turned upward. The sky had begun to darken, swallowed by spreading black clouds. The air grew heavy, filled with an ominous tension. Within those clouds, golden lightning erupted, flashing violently across the sky. The crowd watched in awe, and soon their voices rose again, louder than before, chanting with fervent devotion as they praised Arabian, the Lord of Thunder, and prayed for his protection. Turan observed the overwhelming display, realizing this was the true power of Arabian. Even in such a weakened state, he could dominate the entire sky. It was the pinnacle of magic attainable by a human, and in that moment, Turan silently vowed that he would reach that level someday. The scene shifted once more. A hand extended a bracelet toward Turan, offering it to him. He explained that wearing it would enhance physical stamina, and if mana was infused into it, the effect would grow significantly enough to rival nobles of the Guardian bloodline. However, he warned that it consumed a great deal of mana and should not be used for extended periods. Turan examined it with amazement, remarking that it was an extraordinary item, rare even among great houses and crafted with exceptional skill. Soon after, Aziz's mother spoke, asking if Turan had any interest in formally joining their house. Without hesitation, Turan thanked her sincerely but admitted that it would be difficult for him. She nodded in understanding, saying she had already heard from Aziz that Turan had many responsibilities and could not settle in one place. She added that her offer was simply an old woman's lingering sentiment. Turan responded with sincerity, promising that he would never forget their kindness and that Madame and the Barrack family would always remain his friends. Not long after, Turan prepared to leave. Outside, both the instructor and Aziz came to see him off, approached and tossed him a weapon, telling him to keep it. He explained that while it was not particularly special, it was durable and sharp. Turan caught it and thanked him before storing it away. He then turned to the instructor and respectfully addressed him as master. The man simply smiled and without further words, parted. Ashiz lingered a moment longer before stepping forward and handing Turan a set of clothes. When asked what they were, Ashiz explained that they were specially made garments, resistant to dirt and capable of repairing minor tears. He added that since Turan once said he envied his clothes, he had prepared them for him. Turan looked at him in surprise. Ashiz smiled and said that Turan was a good friend, not only because he had saved his life, but because knowing him had given him much to think about. After a pause, he asked where Turan would go next. Turan answered simply that he would head east. Aziz exhaled and mentioned that if he was going toward Carmine, he had been there before. He warned him to avoid traveling by sea if possible, saying the waves were so rough that even wine glasses would dance. As Turan walked along the road, he fell into deep thought. He knew that to reach the land of Zahar and the Elrel Desert, he would have to face those very waves, though he kept that to himself. Instead, he recalled words once spoken to him, that someone as stubborn as him would never starve, and that he should return safely and repay the cloak he had received. He had agreed back then. Now he continued forward without stopping. His journey carried him across countless places, each step taking him farther away. Then a thought surfaced. Now that he was alone, perhaps he should run. In the next instant, he burst forward. His speed was overwhelming as he dashed through crowds, weaving past people so quickly they could only turn their heads in shock. He crossed the city, passed the open plains, and continued until he finally stopped far from everything. Before him stood a massive mountain. He steadied himself and began walking toward it. As he advanced, he suddenly paused. Something caught his attention, a smell. At first he thought it was a campfire, but almost immediately he corrected himself. It was far worse. It was the stench of burning flesh. Moving closer, the truth became clear. The area had been completely devastated. Houses were reduced to charred ruins, and bodies lay scattered across the ground. Turan frowned, wondering if bandits were responsible, noting that dark elves should not have reached this far. As he continued, a quiet sadness settled within him. Then he noticed a basement in one of the damaged homes. Without hesitation, he forced it open. Inside, a young girl huddled in fear. The moment the door opened, she began to cry. Turan quickly approached, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke gently, telling her to calm down and assuring her he was there to help. Still trembling, she hesitantly asked if it was true. Turan nodded and asked what had happened. Through her fear, she managed to say that a mage had killed everyone. Turan repeated the word in surprise, but before she could continue, she collapsed. He caught her immediately and checked her condition, concluding she was only exhausted. Deciding to prioritize her safety, he carefully carried her outside. But the moment he stepped out, the air shifted. Someone had already taken aim at him. A girl stood at a distance with a drawn bow, her arrow pointed straight at him. Her voice ran cold as she declared she had found him, ordering him to kneel and calling him a murderer. Despite the accusation, Turan remained calm facing them. She demanded that he get on his knees and cursed him as a murderer. Turan stared at her in surprise at the sudden accusation. The moment the girl forced him down, the tension in the air tightened. His eyes narrowed as he met her gaze. But before he could respond, she continued insisting that the destruction should have been enough. A man stepped forward from behind her, charging golden energy into his weapon as he warned that he would release the attack the moment Turan moved. Despite the hostility surrounding him, Turan remained calm and tried to explain that everything was a misunderstanding. However, before he could finish, another man launched a fire-based attack straight at him, causing a massive explosion. The girl immediately turned toward the blonde man, Gil, scolding him for acting recklessly and reminding him that a child had been there. Gil panicked and admitted that it had been an accident caused by his nerves. Her anger quickly faded into shock as her eyes returned to Turan, who stood completely unharmed while shielding the little girl. Not a single burn mark could be seen on him. Using only his magic, he had protected her entirely without letting the attack touch her. The surrounding group froze in disbelief. One of them muttered about the absence of any injury, while another questioned how such a defense was even possible. The archer girl silently observed him, her thoughts racing as she tried to understand his defensive ability and whether it was some form of bloodline power. Turan then spoke calmly, making it clear that he was not responsible for the attack on the village. He repeated that it was a misunderstanding and warned that if they continued attacking him, he would be forced to defend himself. The girl hesitated as her gaze shifted toward the child in Turan's arms. The situation no longer matched her earlier assumptions. Slowly, her posture relaxed and the hostility faded from her expression. She admitted that his actions did not align with someone who would destroy a village and remain behind just to save a child. After a brief pause, she introduced herself as Bison and asked for his name, which Turan answered simply. Even then, doubt lingered as she questioned how she could trust him. Turan suggested that they wait for the child to wake up, as she might have seen the real culprit. At that, Bison's expression shifted with realization as she mentioned a name tied to the attacks. Turan admitted that he was unfamiliar with the name, prompting Bison to explain. She stated that the culprit was a mad mage responsible for repeated attacks over the past few months, targeting isolated villages and tribes. The victims were burned alive, leaving no survivors, which was why even the mage's identity remained unknown. All that was known was the name people had given him, an existence feared like a monster known as the Era of Mist. Sometime later, the child regained consciousness and weakly described what she had seen, explaining that the attacker was a man in a red cloak with a beard and a rough appearance like a lumberjack. Bison and her team listened carefully, taking in every detail. Once the explanation ended, Bison's gaze returned to Turan, and without hesitation, she bowed her head. She apologized sincerely, admitting that her impatience had led her to wrongly accuse him and even threaten him. Gil also stepped forward and offered his apology. Turan observed them quietly as silence settled, his thoughts drifting. He realized that even among nobles there were those whose sense of duty clouded their judgment, yet he also saw that Bison possessed honesty, as she admitted her mistake without hesitation. Returning to the present, he acknowledged calmly that her concern for the child had been the most important thing. Bison then asked whether he had come to capture the culprit, but Turan denied having any connection to the matter. She explained that her group had been tracking the incident after detecting fresh signs of fire. She also mentioned that their group included a natural tracker, which caught Turan's attention. He asked whether she belonged to the Zahar family and questioned why someone like her would be in such a place. Bison quickly denied it, and introduced herself as Bison Carmine of the Carmine family from Avicha, then gestured toward her companions as she explained that they were her allies. She then mentioned Asha. Bison explained that Asha carried faint traces of the ancient Zahar noble bloodline. While she possessed exceptional ability in tracking magic, she lacked any real talent for concealment. Her tone then shifted as she made a request, asking whether Turan would assist them in hunting down the culprit. In return, she offered him the entire reward for capturing the mage, including her share of mana, stating that all she wanted was the merit tied to the achievement. Turan did not answer immediately, and instead asked about the strength of their target. Bison explained that the culprit was at the level of a noble mage, and that some of the villages he attacked had been under the protection of multiple knights, yet all had been slaughtered. Hearing that, Turan fell into brief thought, recognizing that an opponent capable of killing several knights was exactly the kind of challenge he needed. With that conclusion, he accepted her offer without hesitation. Bison responded with a faint smile and suggested that their first priority should be ensuring the child's safety. Sometime later, Turan arrived at a settlement and handed a pouch of money to a man, instructing him to use it to raise the child until she was grown. The man nodded quickly and assured him that he would take responsibility. Turan's gaze hardened as he warned that he would return in a few years to check on the child, causing the man to tremble as he understood the weight of those words. After leaving the child behind, Turan regrouped with Bison's team. Asha stepped forward and activated her tracking ability as a faint blue glow formed in her eyes while she scanned the surroundings and noted that they needed to widen their search. They began moving through the forest as Asha's focus remained sharp while she examined the terrain. Turan asked how she was tracking the target, and Asha explained that she first searched for human footprints before following the scent of ash once they reached a main path. She added that if the culprit had not changed clothes, traces of ash would still linger on him. Turan acknowledged her methods silently, recognizing that it was precise and efficient, and that her earlier failure had been due to a lack of information rather than skill. Suddenly, Asha stopped and stated that she had found something, prompting Turan to follow her line of sight as Bison signaled everyone to slow down. Moments later, they arrived near a stone cave hidden within the forest. Bison instructed Turan to move forward with her while ordering the others to stay back. Together, they stepped into the cave, followed closely by the rest of the group. Inside, the darkness was thick, but Bison ignited a faint blue manolight that illuminated the path ahead. She then turned to Asha and asked whether anyone was inside, and Asha confirmed that there was one person. They advanced deeper into the cave, until the faint glow revealed a figure standing near a burning pile of wood. The man stood calmly at the center, his presence unsettling as the entire group froze. His appearance carried an eerie aura as he looked at them and spoke casually, questioning what had brought them to such an isolated place. Turan stepped forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the man as he questioned whether he was the one responsible for wiping out the village and nearby tribes. Asha quietly confirmed that she could sense a dangerous presence from him, leaving no doubt that this was their target. Without hesitation, Bison raised her bow as Mana gathered around her while she drew the string back, demanding to know if he was behind the killings and kidnappings. The man responded vaguely, pretending ignorance, but in the next instant, a violent explosion erupted as flames burst outward and engulfed the area. Bison and her teammates were thrown back by the force, crashing into the ground as pain spread through their bodies, but Turin reacted instantly, forming a protective barrier around himself and extending it to shield Bison, blocking the full impact of the attack. The man's expression shifted in surprise, as he had not expected anyone to withstand the blast so easily. Taking advantage of the moment, Bison released her arrow, which flew straight toward him and pierced into his thigh. He staggered and fell to the ground, struggling to maintain his balance, but he quickly recovered and activated another spell. The ground trembled as stone magic surged forward, and two massive stone hands rose violently from the earth, reaching toward Turan and Bison with the intent to crush them. As the stone hands closed in, Turan recognized the use of earth manipulation, realizing that the man did not possess a flame-based bloodline as he had initially assumed. Without hesitation, he leaped away to avoid the crushing force, his eyes locking onto the man the moment he landed. The culprit raised his hand again to prepare another attack, but Turan did not give him the opportunity. Mana surged through his body as he unleashed a sharp strike that sliced cleanly through the man's arm, severing it instantly and drawing out a scream of agony that echoed through the cave. Before the man could recover, Turan followed up without pause as lightning burst forth from his body. His thunder magic struck directly into the man's chest, sending violent currents coursing through him as blue energy spread rapidly across his body. The man convulsed as his vision flickered under the overwhelming force. From behind, Bison called out to ask if it was over, and Turin replied calmly that he would handle the situation while instructing her to check on the others. He stepped closer to the fallen man and extended his hand as threads of mana formed into bindings that wrapped tightly around the man's body, locking his movements and sealing his senses. After some time, the man regained consciousness and saw Turin standing before him. Turin pointed at his neck and warned that he should not move, making it clear that any attempt to release mana would result in immediate death. The man demanded to know who he was and how they had found him, but Bison stepped forward and stated that they had their own methods before asking directly whether he was responsible for the attacks. The man remained silent at first, his expression twisting with anger as he refused to respond, causing Turan's gaze to darken. Without hesitation, Turan inflicted pain on the man's already injured leg, forcing a reaction as the man trembled under the intensity. Turan demanded an answer, questioning why a noble mage would burn innocent villagers, his tone carrying no sympathy. The man finally spoke and claimed that everything had been the will of a god, explaining that by burning the flesh and souls of sinners, he believed he could reach that god. Bison's expression froze in disbelief as the man continued, stating that he had been taught a secret method that allowed him to obtain other bloodlines. He insisted that by sacrificing more people, he would eventually gain the power of a flame bloodline. Bison's face turned cold as she rejected the idea immediately, stating that it was nothing but madness. She explained that an innate bloodline could not be obtained through such methods and that committing massacres for such a reason was beyond reason. Turan remained silent, but his expression shifted slightly as a memory surfaced in his mind of himself growing stronger through the killing of demonic beasts, and the similarity lingered in an unsettling way. The man laughed weakly and insisted that such methods were not unheard of among certain mages, describing it as a form of ritual, before muttering that he only needed a few more sacrifices to finally obtain the power he desired. Turan's gaze hardened as he grabbed the man firmly, his grip tightening as a chilling realization formed, and he began to consider that this might not be mere madness but a hidden truth behind it.